Well, hello and welcome to Apologetics. I hope everybody's having a great day and having a great week. We're here today with Donnie Badinsky and Matt Naylor from Standing for Truth Ministries, and they're here to talk about mitochondrial Eve and a bunch of other stuff too. I think they're going to be discussing Y chromosome data and mutation rates. So it's going to be an awesome interview. I can't wait. So you guys doing okay today?
Yes, we're always excited and we get that instant adrenaline rush when we get to speak on biblical creation, mitochondrial Eve, Y chromosome Noah. Brian, I got to say, brother, you are doing an excellent job with your ministry and with your channel. You've had some real heavy hitters on. Just recently, you had Michael J. Ord, Tim Clary. You're doing great work. So you keep it up, Brian. It's a privilege to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate it very, very much. And well, I know that both of y'all have a presentations today, but I want to introduce you guys. I know a lot of people know who you are at this point, but I always like to introduce my speakers in case somebody's unfamiliar with your backgrounds. Um, All right, I'm gonna start with you, Donnie. Donnie is the founder and host of Standing for Truth Ministries, a platform dedicated to defending biblical creation, intelligent design, and reliability of Scripture through debates, interviews, and educational programs. Donnie has moderated or participated in well over 300 live debates, including one of the largest online collections of origins debates anywhere. He is known for his in-depth knowledge of genetics, flood geology, and biblical anthropology. Has developed several models addressing major questions in the origins debate, including the Genesis core model and work on created uh, heterozygosity and rapid post-flood diversification. And my next speaker is Matt Naylor. Matt is a research content creator and a longtime contributor to Standing for Truth Ministries. He is known for his work in population genetics discussions, mutational load arguments, and critiques of evolutionary models of human ancestry. Matt frequently collaborates with Donnie on educational live streams, debates, and post debate analysis segments. Online, he has gained a reputation for his ability to break down complex genetic concepts and understandable explanations for general audiences. We're going to be seeing some of that today in his presentation, I'm sure. He is also a reoccurring guest in SFT series on human origins, Neanderthals, and genetic entropy. Um, I thank y'all guys for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it. You guys have been doing wonderful work yourself lately. I saw your seminar with how do you pronounce that YouTube name? Shamunian, Shamunian.
Shimoonian, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that
I
was our
saw that.
second seminar in that series.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Matt's presentation on dinosaurs living with man.
Oh yeah.
Hey, I was having fun watching him have fun.
Yeah,
He looked like he was having a good time.
and
It's
refuting
just
the critics too on how they try to explain the clear evidence for dinosaur and man coexisting in terms of these ancient art depictions and historical accounts and so on and so forth. So that's why we pay Matt the big bucks at Standing for Truth Ministries, because he kills it. Actually, we got to
Right,
do a
right,
show on
right.
your channel, Brian, in the future on that topic, dinosaurs and man.
Yes, yes, I was thinking the same thing. I would love for y'all to do that discussion because
it's
that
fun.
was an awesome discussion. Yes, yes,
People have
indeed.
no idea
Uh,
because they just see little bits of it here and there, right? You see a little YouTube short pop up, and it's like, well, dragons. They were talking about dinosaurs, and that's it, right? Or oh, that Alexander the Great talked about them, or this calendar shows pictures of dragons, so therefore they were probably dinosaurs. It's like, come on, let's just do it all. Let's talk about
Yeah.
everything here.
But
There's
let's take
so much.
everything into one. And it was just so good. It was
Yeah.
so good.
right, right, right. Y'all have been doing an awesome job. I appreciate it, and I think everybody else has too because y'all been killing it. I know you've got some models on paleo or on Australopithecines, and you were talking about earlier. You were responding to Christopher Roop on the human pygmy hypothesis. So, is there anybody else that takes Christopher Roop's position on that? I wonder.
One.
One,
It's a
Christopher Root.
party of one. No,
Yeah,
I think
sea
there's a
science.
party of two, sea science. But
Sea
his is a
science.
little bit, yeah, his is a little different. Where he thinks, if I remember correctly, Lucy is a mix but of human and ape bones. But that's a difficult one to swallow too. At least Chris basically says no, 99% of Lucy is human. Whereas, yeah, Matt, the person you pointed to. But I'll say this, Brian, I just released an article, an in-depth article, like you pointed out. People can see it on the website. The PDF was just uploaded. You can find it on Patreon. I made a community post examining the Australopithecines uh, and offering a consistent, balanced, and scientifically rigorous model that will leave us free from being trapped and cornered, I think, by informed evolutionists. Because when you're going up against people like Gutsick Gibbon on paleoanthropology, you definitely got to know your stuff on the topic. And so I think I've put forth a pretty balanced model for people to be edified by, hopefully.
Right. And me and you both are doing heat problem videos
Yes, yes.
constantly.
I love your heat problem solution, brother. I've always been a strong advocate of what? Multiple working hypotheses. As a matter of fact, 3 young Earth creationists here with 3 different models and solutions for the heat problem. Look at
Right.
that. So we can
Right.
take it from different angles, right?
Right. Right.
Got to.
I love it. Uh, uh, I referenced the mantle and advection. Both me and you, Donnie, bypass conduction, and I actually found peer-reviewed papers on the convection and advection and all that. So it's great. I'm fixing to launch 2 other videos. One this year, before the end of this year, hopefully, on the heat problem. So
Nice.
it's great. Very source
Well,
heavy.
what we need to do then,
I love
Matt
it.
and I, maybe early next year, Matt, we got to have Brian on and we can interview him on his heat problem solution.
Right.
That'd be fun. We can do it live, take some questions, challenges, and just show
Oh
people
yeah,
that to what evolutionists say is a irrefutable challenge, right? Gutsick Gibbon would say that the heat problem precludes young Earth creation. And so we can actually show them multiple approaches that you could take to address that perceived challenge. So I
and
think that'd
they
be a good
also
idea.
make certain right, and they make certain assumptions too on the heat problem that's pretty obvious. And when I started researching it, I was actually like, wow, they're making these assumptions when they're approaching it. So
Of course. Without these
so
assumptions, all of their critiques fall away. They do the same thing with the mud problem. They put evolutionary concepts into their view of a problem for us, and they don't take in catastrophic events. It's like, well, that's our model. How could you not take in the one aspect that makes our model what it is? You can't put
right, right,
uniformitarianism and cram it into a catastrophism. It just, they never work. So, but that's how they have to do it. Otherwise, they can't.
Well, remember, they
right.
deny the first sentence of the Bible. In the beginning, God
Yep.
created the heaven and the earth. When you believe that, then everything else that we read in the scriptures, the miracles, the resurrection, the virgin birth, so on and so forth, very easy to believe. Then when it comes to creation, we just have so much evidence, which people are going to see here tonight, live in our 2 talks here. They're going to see that the scientific evidence, the historical data, it all lines up beautifully, and it affirms what? It affirms exactly what the Bible describes about human origins.
Right.
Right, right. All right. I guess we can go ahead and jump into our topic for today. We are discussing, like I said, mitochondrial Eve, and we're going to be getting into mutation rates, Y chromosome. We're going to be doing a lot of different things, but I'm very curious to see what these guys have prepared for us and is fixing to present to us. I love it. There will be a live Q&A following the discussion part. The discussion part will follow the presentation, and then following the discussion, then we'll have a live Q&A. So you guys send in your questions, please. You can go ahead and start sending them in. I will start saving them, and then send as many as you want. If you want to send 3 or 4 questions, that's fine. Just and as these guys
Easy.
are talking, yeah. Well, no, yeah, don't overload them. Yeah, yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. I'm messing around.
We're used to
Well, thank you.
marathon streams. You keep us busy till
Yeah.
same time tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once we
400
collapse
is fine.
over, then you know that's it. You need to shut it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Once my
There has
back
to be a
and neck
point,
can't
of
take
course,
it
but
anymore.
yeah.
Yeah. What you're going to
Right,
get is
right.
Donnie on another account sending questions to me forever is what's going to happen.
The hardest, most difficult questions.
hardest ones ever. Yeah.
Right.
Dr.
All right. We're
Dodgeball
gonna start.
Dancer and Cardinal 2.0 is going to be the name of my
Right.
separate account.
We're gonna start with Donnie, and he's gonna be doing a presentation first. I think he said about 30 minutes to 45 minutes, something like that, and then we'll cue it over to Matt. So, are you ready, Donnie?
Yes, let me get it all set here. We'll screen share. It's good to have Sister Lynn Mitzi in the house. Good to see you. She says Donnie deals. Yes, we have a we have a deal for evolutionists, that's for sure. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Ephesians 2, for by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. There's a deal for the critics, right, brothers? Simply believe on Jesus, trust in him, and you'll have everlasting life, which means there is a heat problem, isn't there, gentlemen? But it's not for the young earth creationists. The Bible is very clear that anybody who's not been regenerated, justified, passed from death unto life will be cast into the lake of fire. That's a heat problem right there. So, okay. If
Yeah, they have a really big heat problem, don't they?
well, it's right. It's why we do what we do, because the Great Commission, preach the gospel, make disciples of all nations, because we want people to avoid the heat problem. So, yeah, if the slides are up, you guys are good to go. My audio is coming in good. Everything looks good. I can start.
I'm gonna go ahead and silence my mic.
All right, gentlemen, we got a lot here for you, for the audience. Matt and I, with our talks, we've given many talks. We spent a great portion of our summer actually giving talks on Adam, Eve, the scientific evidence for Adam and Eve, the importance of a historical Adam, dismantling the best evidence for common descent. We've got entire talks dedicated to addressing ERVs, chromosome 2 fusion. Tonight, we're focusing on the historical Adam and Eve, more of a focus on Eve. But in my section here, I am going to focus a bit on the Y chromosome and also Y chromosome Adam, which is directly related, of course, to Y chromosome Noah, because our last Y chromosomal ancestor would be Noah about 4,500 years ago. Okay, let's begin with a couple quotes here just to show you exactly why this topic is so important. Because atheists and militant critics, they've understood for a long time this anti-Christian formula where if you take away the historical Adam, you take away the historical Eve, then you take away the need for Jesus, the last Adam, the second Adam, and the gospel. So notice what Richard Dawkins here says, famous atheist evolutionary biologist and zoologist. He says, no educated person believes the Adam and Eve myth nowadays. Quite dogmatic, eh? But it's surprising how many parents think that it's somehow fun to pass on this. So apparently all these parents that he's talking about, none of them are educated. None of them have degrees. None of them gone to college, gone to school. According to him, fun to pass on this falsehood to their children. I would want to argue that the truth of evolution, well, Richard Dawkins, it depends what you mean by evolution, because if by evolution you mean changes in allele frequencies and populations over generations, or simply change over time, then we're not going to have much to disagree on. Because if by evolution you mean domestic dogs and wolves are related through common ancestry, that they can be traced back to a common arc ancestor roughly 4,500 years ago, then We're not going to disagree. But if by evolution, you mean large scale evolution, descent with modification, that all life, including plants and animals, dogs, wolves, and banana plants are related through common ancestry, that's where we have an issue. That's where the scientific data contradicts that kind of evolution. So he says, I would want to argue that the truth of evolution, so that's what he means by evolution, common descent, is more interesting and more poetic. This is a very interesting and important quote. Frank Zindler, he did a debate. You can see the source at the bottom here. He did a debate with famous Christian theologian William Lane Craig. He said, the most devastating thing that biology did to Christianity was the discovery of biological evolution. Now that we know that Adam and Eve never were real people, so according to him, Adam and Eve never were real people. Obviously, he's not familiar with all the scientific evidence that we're going to be covering here tonight. So get ready. I'm excited. Now that we know that Adam and Eve never were real people, the central myth of Christianity is destroyed. See, these atheists understand, you take away the historical Adam and Eve, fundamental Christianity is destroyed. Your most essential doctrines like salvation. If there never was an Adam and Eve, there never was an original sin. If there never was an original sin, there is no need of salvation. If there is no need of salvation, there is no need of a savior. And I submit that puts Jesus, historical or otherwise, into the ranks of the unemployed. I think that evolution is absolutely the death knell of Christianity. And because William Lane Craig, although he does excellent work, I got so many of his books, he's great at demolishing the atheists on general evidence for theism and Christianity. On this point, he did not do a great job at all because he's not a strict biblical creationist. He's not a young earth creationist. He is a theistic evolutionist. So he really struggled, in my opinion, to address that. The atheists have understood this anti-Christian formula for a long time. If there was no first Adam, there's no need for the last Adam. Francis Collins from BioLogos. And you'll also notice that these theistic evolutionists, they'll make a lot of the same arguments as the atheists. I'm not saying they're atheists, but a lot of them allegorize or symbolize what's described in Genesis in terms of the origins of man. So Francis Collins, famous theistic evolutionist, says, there is no way you can develop this level of variation between us from one or two ancestors. So that's one of the reasons he believes a real, literal Adam and Eve is impossible. But as you're going to see, these are straw man arguments. These theistic evolutionists, these atheistic evolutionists, they're making arguments from evolutionary creation. What about special creation? This argument assumes that all DNA variation is due to mutations. Of course, if we have to explain all the DNA variety and DNA differences from a couple ancestors in just a few thousand years, well, then of course, all of those mutations accumulating over that short amount of time is going to destroy genomes and biological organisms. But that's why the creation evolution positions have two very different starting points. It's the evolutionist that assumes all DNA variety is due to mutations. The creationist believes in, at least we hold to, created heterozygosity. There's that word. And the evolutionists hate it because there's so much incredible evidence supporting the design diversity or created heterozygosity model that Adam and Eve, and this would apply universally to the created kinds, were created in a state of DNA diversity with pre-existing front-loaded DNA differences within and also between. And that way it doesn't take a long amount of time. It doesn't take millions of years to accumulate the DNA variety that can result in change. No, every single generation you can have novel chromosomal combinations since those DNA differences are built in. What does the Bible say? Well, I want to show you guys that the Bible does teach very clearly a real Adam and a real Eve. Then we're going to get into the science and show why we can believe what the Bible says, because the scientific data confirms what the Bible says. Genesis 2:7. We're going to move through this part quick. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground. There's Adam. And breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman. There's Eve. The book of Genesis makes several genetic statements with significant implications. If what the Bible is saying is true here, that we all come from one man, Adam, and one woman, Eve, well, there's some significant implications there in terms of genetics. We should find in the world of genetics evidence of that and not evidence that contradicts it. Jesus Christ himself, God manifested in the flesh. Matthew 19:4. And he answered and said unto them, have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning, this is the creation week, made them male and female? There's Adam and Eve. But from the beginning of creation, so Mark 10:6, God made them male and female. Those are the words of Jesus Christ himself. 1 Corinthians 15:45, the apostle Paul. So Jesus, the apostles, the biblical authors, they all believed, just like us. They believed in a literal historical Adam and Eve. And so it is written, the first man, Adam, was made a living soul. The last Adam, that's Jesus Christ, was made a quickening spirit. So if there was no first Adam, what's the need of who? The last Adam. Because of the sin of Adam, okay, that brought us into this fallen world, the need was a savior who is Jesus Christ. Genesis 3:20. And Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. I mean, it's so simple. Adam, the first man, Eve, the mother of all living. Oh, well, maybe this is all symbolic or allegorical, or when Jesus spoke of Adam and Eve being created at the beginning, maybe because he's talking about divorce contextually. So maybe he's just trying to make a point and we don't want to take him too literally, or maybe he's just speaking to the people at that time because that's what they believed. So he's just speaking to their level. Okay, well, let's have a look at Matthew 23:35, a discriminating point that demolishes those interpretations. This is fascinating. That upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias. Isn't this interesting? Jesus references Abel as a real historical figure. Who killed Abel? Cain. Who were the parents of Cain and Abel? Adam and Eve. Here's the significance of this passage. Jesus cites Abel in Matthew 23:35 as a real historical person whose blood was literally shed, not figuratively, not allegorically, but literally. Abel's murder by Cain is treated by Jesus as a factual event in real space-time history. But if Abel is historical, let me ask you this question. Do real historical people have mythical and allegorical parents? I exist. I have parents. Are those parents mythical or are they real? I think the answer is obvious there. Abel's murder by Cain is treated by Jesus as a factual event in real space-time history. But if Abel is historical, then his parents must also be historical, Adam and Eve, because real people do not come from mythical, allegorical, or symbolic parents. That is a complete destruction of these theistic evolution positions. So the moment Jesus affirms Abel as a literal individual, he simultaneously affirms the literal existence of Adam and Eve, who are the only parents Scripture gives him. This reinforces his earlier statement that from the beginning of creation, notice how all of this comes together. All of these different scriptures come together beautifully, consistently into a single truth, that God created two people, Adam and Eve, separate, independent, and special from any other form of life. That includes chimpanzees, that includes orangutans, that includes banana plants, showing that Jesus himself locates Adam and Eve at the actual beginning of human history, not as allegorical figures or late additions to a long evolutionary process. Okay, I think it's pretty clear to anybody looking at these passages objectively that the Bible is claiming there's no common ancestry between humans and any other form of life. I mean, can it be any more clear, actually? I would like to ask theistic evolutionists or naturalistic evolutionists who deny what the Bible clearly says, how else could God have explained that we all go back to two people, Adam and Eve? Is there any way he could have made it clearer? I'd like to see that answer. And very significant genetic implications here. And so we can make predictions. The predictions we've made, one Y chromosomal ancestor, one mitochondrial DNA ancestor, low genetic diversity, for example, They've all come true. Biblical expectations, they confirm what the Bible's saying. And we're going to get into a couple of those. What I like, Matt and I, we've done 3 major formal debates since the summer. We did a debate seminar in the summer, went 4.5 hours, very comprehensive, with prominent evolutionist conspiracy cats, known as culture cats now. We did that debate on Adam and Eve, put ourselves in the hot seat. We took the affirmative. Excellent event. We enjoy discussing these topics with conspiracy cats. We did one a couple months ago with Planet Peterson and PhD Tony, Evolution on Trial. Tons of fun. Fiery debate if you're looking for a fast-paced, fiery kind of debate, heated debate. And then last month we did one with Austin Sims and Flying Spaghetti Auditor on the question, are humans and chimps related? I love that topic. I believe that's a challenge that needs to continue being put at the evolutionists, because we could argue all day, are humans and banana plants, are humans and strawberries related? What about abiogenesis? What about the evolution from prokaryotes to eukaryotes, single to multi-celled evolution? You know what? If we stay as close to home as possible, gentlemen, and ask the question, are humans and chimps related, which the evidence suggests they're not, then notice this. You put an X right there through that relationship, through those branches, put an X through that. If humans and chimps aren't related, then by definition, humans and strawberries aren't related. If you refute the idea that humans and strawberries are related, well, you haven't necessarily overturned the evidence that might suggest humans and chimps are related. So if you refute the notion that humans and chimps are related, everything else crumbles. Universal common descent crumbles. Abiogenesis and naturalistic origins crumbles, because that means humans are specially created, separate from any other form of life, just as the Bible describes. This, my friends, is the Y chromosome challenge. And I want to show you where we're at with the critics. Have they answered it? Have they not? You can go back to debates that I've done 5 years ago or so when I started doing this. Guts and Gibbon, for example, we've had some really good debates in the past. Debated her 3 times formally on Modern Day Debate, going back 4 or 5 years ago. One of my major arguments back then was this point, the Y chromosome. It's been years and we've gotten more data, and it's only made this argument more powerful. And so let's see where they're at. Okay, let's start at the basics though. The Y chromosome, the mitochondrial DNA. We're going to be focusing a lot on the mitochondrial DNA and mutation rates and refuting the critic. We're going to be demolishing Dodgeball Dan Stern Cardinal here tonight. We've seen, we've analyzed, we've examined all his arguments. It's not going to be good for him here tonight, okay? And so the Y chromosome is uniparentally inherited DNA. It's passed down on one side, the father's side. Mitochondrial DNA exists outside of the nucleus. Okay, it's a small chromosome, comprised about 16,500 letters. Y chromosome is about 60 to 80 million letters. Matt, remember in our debate, these guys kept saying, oh, you're just ignoring the rest of the genome in favor of this small little Y chromosome. So I asked them, I said, okay, what's the size of the Y chromosome? They're like, well, I don't know, 40,000. It's like, no, you're off by a ton. It's a large chromosome. Okay, we're looking at in the millions, 60 to 80 million. And so the mitochondrial DNA is also passed down on one side. It's passed down maternally. Okay. And so these act as good chromosomes to answer the question of ancestry. For the most part, they lack recombination. We can build nice family trees. And when you take all Y chromosomes worldwide, male Y chromosomes, there's very low diversity. We're all 99.9% the same for the most part in the Y chromosome. And we can trace all Y chromosomes back to a single Y chromosomal ancestor, roughly 4,500 years ago, based on known mutation rates. The mutation rate in the Y chromosomes, roughly 1 to 3 per generation. The mitochondrial DNA, same thing, low diversity. We're going to get into that here tonight. We're going to examine all the mutation rate studies. Matt has an excellent presentation for you guys on that. The mitochondrial DNA also mutates fast. There's low diversity on average, roughly 20 to 30 DNA differences separating any 2 people. So if you have a chromosome like mitochondrial DNA with low diversity, but a fast mutation rate, Well, that means it's not going to take a long time to accumulate the diversity. If it's low, there's only a few DNA differences in light of a fast mutation rate. We see the same thing in the Y chromosome. Okay, so with that understood, all human Y chromosomes nearly identical. Well, what about our supposed closest cousin on the evolutionary phylogenetic tree, the chimpanzee? So as you can see here in this visual, we've got humans and chimps. Then you've got gorillas. They believe humans, chimps and bonobos would go back to a common ancestor. We'd agree with that. Bring in the gorillas, about 7-ish million years ago here. Humans and chimps, about 6 million years, 6 to 7. There's some debate there. And the point is, chimps and humans, supposedly that's our closest cousin. Okay. When you actually observe, when you have a look at the overall DNA differences in the Y chromosomes, overall gene content, size differences, and architecture, the human Y and the chimp Y, you can see it right on the visual, they're less than 30% the same. The chimp Y is half the size. It's missing, for the most part, the entirety of its heterochromatic arm. It's funny because Dr. Dodgeball Dan Stern Cardinal hasn't answered the challenge, hasn't even tried. I've listed at least 12 questions, technical, sophisticated questions. None of them have been answered yet by the critics. He's like, well, heterochromatin, it's for the most part pretty useless. And so these organisms can tolerate a lot of error and change. And I mean, thanks for the story. Thanks for the evolutionary philosophy, but can we get a sophisticated mathematical model, please? They're the ones always asking for the math on the heat problem, which we've given them. Where's their math? Where's their sophisticated explanation? But he's wrong on that as well. I remember debating Conspiracy Cats. I corrected him on that argument. Heterochromatin, which is this densely packed kind of DNA that comprises a lot of repetitive sequences like satellite DNA, but it actually plays vital roles in nuclear organization, chromosomal stability, and gene silencing. So no, you can't just say, well, it's useless and non-functional, so the chimpanzee line can tolerate all that error. Okay, well, how come the human Y retained it? It's a weak response. And when you consider overall size differences, architecture, and gene content, the gorilla Y is actually more similar to the human Y than either are to the chimp. And yet we're supposed to share more close common ancestor with the chimp. There's a break in their hierarchy. Notice this right from the secular literature. Despite a recent divergence of these species, their Y chromosomes differ a little bit. No, enormously in size and gene content. Notice how you can demolish ape to man evolution directly from their own literature. You almost don't even have to go to young earth creationist literature. You can dig into all their papers. You can listen to their lectures. I find the best arguments against human evolution from their own side because I listen to a lot of lectures. I read a lot of their papers. I listen to a lot of their interviews because it is kind of a fascinating story. I'll give that to them. It's an interesting story. Hominin and evolution would make a good Netflix series, but it's not true. It's a fairy tale, but an interesting fairy tale nonetheless. And so you actually see a lot of the ongoing debate in the paleoanthropological community when you listen to their lectures, talks, and discussions. And that's where I get a lot of my arguments. Anyways, Y chromosomes differ enormously in size and gene content. The chimpanzee Y is only half the size of the human Y, and the percentage of gene families shared by these two chromosomes that split roughly 6 million years ago. Notice this, comparing autosomes, is similar to that shared by human and chicken autosomes that split 310 million years ago. That's how shocked they were. Not predicted, not expected. Puzzlingly, notice my interpretation of the visual, which is pretty easy when you just look at it, is exactly what they're explaining in the literature. Puzzlingly, in terms of shared genes and overall architecture, the human Y is more similar to the gorilla Y than to the chimpanzee Y. Here's from 2024. Brian and I have discussed this a lot. Brian's done some fantastic work on this issue as well. And so this is the most sophisticated analysis ever done of the ape sex chromosomes. Evolutionists taxonomically put humans as apes, human apes, and then you've got non-human great apes, according to the evolutionary model. So they got humans here. Okay. What you can do is compare, again, the most sophisticated sequencing data available, human Y to chimp Y, less than 30%. Some evolutionists, they just don't understand this topic. They'll say, oh, but when you take the chimp and put it here to the human, well, you're ignoring that because it's 45.1. Yeah, you're going to get those kinds of discrepancies when one Y chromosome, like on the chimp Y chromosome, is literally half the size, and massive portions of the Y chromosome don't even align. So of course, you're going to get two different numbers. That just showcases even more how different these Y chromosomes are. The differences between human and chimpanzee Y chromosomes are said to be due to a combination. So this is not simple gene loss, okay? No, it's a combination of factors. We've got gene loss, gene gain, and large-scale chromosomal rearrangements. You'll see, because they'll argue, and I debated Gutsy Gibbon on this informally for a couple hours. They'll say, well, you believe chimps and bonobos go back to a common ancestor, and they have some differences. But yeah, you can explain those differences quite easily because you don't have to invoke gene gain. You don't have to invoke the loss of entire kinds of gene content, like the heterochromatin. I put out an entire article that's pretty technical showing what kind of differences you have to explain between chimps and bonobos, which are easy. Even in 4,500 years, those changes could happen rapidly. But once you bring in the human, then it's not apples to apples. It's apples to oranges, actually. We'll get into that a little bit. More than 30% of the chimpanzee Y chromosome fails to align to the human Y chromosome. Of course, you got those two different numbers there. There's massive regions that don't even align, evolutionists. The portions of the Y chromosomes in humans and chimps are said to have been rearranged. Where's even the best they have to offer? Like Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal. It's just stories and evolutionary philosophy. It's like you can provide mechanisms all day. We want a model. Asserting mechanisms, claiming mechanisms is not the same as model building. The Y chromosome differences aren't just point mutations, guys. They're massive structural reorganizations, gene losses, and transpositions. These changes require major, not minor, like with chimps and bonobos, but major chromosomal rearrangements, not just neutral drift. Yet there's no proposed mechanistic pathway or mathematical model. Not a single evolutionist has provided a mathematical model showing how such large-scale structural changes could happen without destroying function over millions of years. The evolutionist response is storytelling without quantification. Quantify the changes, guys. Put in the work. Guardians of common descent, because that's exactly what they are. They're apologists for their science fiction religion. Must show the mutation rates, the fixation probabilities, and time frames needed to produce such divergence, and no such model exists. If humans and chimps really do share a common ancestor recently, then such radical divergence in such a short time frame, notice this is important, should be impossible without breaking function. You're going to get all those massive changes in a short amount of time, according to the evolutionary model, and expect these creatures to actually thrive. They're going to be so degenerate. They're going to have so many problems that they're going to be a lot different when we observe them in their habitats than what we see, okay? We don't see a creature that has lost this amount in the Y chromosome in 6 million years, roughly. The Y chromosome is essential for male fertility and gene regulation. How could such massive architectural shifts occur and still maintain viability in both lineages? Notice none of these questions have been answered. All they do is just hand wave it away. Dr. Dodgeball, Dan Stern-Cardinal, the 5Ds of evolutionist dodgeball, dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. He put out a video review recently of my opening statement because the evolutionists are doing massive damage control because team evolution in these debates are just failing miserably. Even their own side are admitting that they lost. Go look at the comment sections of these debates. Even their own side are admitting that they did a poor job. So we got to get damage control from evolutionists like Dan. And he just hand waves away the Y chromosome. Well, you know, the heterochromatin, we already debunked that. It's largely non-functional, so they can tolerate error. And it's just structural changes and massive gene deletions. It's like, you don't get it. Okay? That's evolutionary philosophy. Just naming mechanisms is not actually providing a model. I wonder if they'll ever actually address these questions. And these are the easier questions. Wait till you see the next couple slides. How could such massive architectural shifts occur and still maintain viability in both lineages? Even the Hughes et al. Et al. Would mean, and others, multiple authors on this paper, admitted that these results were extraordinary and unprecedented among closely related species. Look at all these differences. It's not just minor. Palindromes, those are large inverted DNA repeats that read the same forward and backward. They form mirror image arms that constantly copy, correct each other through gene conversion. On the Y chromosome, palindromes protect essential sperm genes, but they also make the Y extremely vulnerable to large deletions and rearrangements. Key point, humans and chimps have entirely different palindrome families, meaning they cannot be inherited from a shared ancestor. Explain those differences. What about amplicons? Highly repeated large DNA blocks on the Y chromosome that often contain multiple copies of fertility-related genes. These regions can expand, contract, duplicate, or rearrange, making them hotspots for structural change. Key point? So we saw the palindromes, now the amplicons. Human and chimp ampliconic regions are not the same system. They differ in size, gene family, structure, and copy number. The core scientific failures of the critics. Show me the ancestral Y chromosome reconstruction where we can actually map out and model the necessary changes in the specific lineages to come to the differences that we see today. Evolutionists cannot claim gain or loss without knowing the ancestral state. Hughes et al. Even admitted 2010, the ancestral state cannot be determined. Storytelling and evolutionary philosophy does not equal reconstruction. No rate-based population genetic model. Have we seen a rate-based population genetic model, Brian and Matt? I think you guys know the answer to that. It's no. Not one critic has produced a model showing required duplication/deletion rates, required recombination frequencies, timeline feasibility, population fertility survival. Mechanisms without quantification are not explanations. The structural differences are too large. It's 2 times size differences. Entirely different palindromic families, as we saw. Human-specific ampliconic architectures. Loss of the heterochromatic arm in pan. Makova, 2024. Did things get better for the evolutionists? No, it got worse. Only 14 to 27% alignability. Guys, these are architecture level differences, not just copy number tweaks. This is right here, sums up years and years worth of evolutionist responses. Evolutionists confuse mechanisms with demonstrations. Makova et al. Mention processes that exist, but they do not do this. So even their most recent, most technical, sophisticated paper on this issue, this is what they don't do. Model them, quantify them, test them, simulate them, or show they can produce the observed differences. Possibility. Well, maybe because of this, they can experience all this kind of loss. Possibility does not equal feasibility or modeling. Evolutionists, pause this, screenshot it. We want answers that are empirical to these challenges. How did these massive architectural changes occur mechanistically in 6 to 7 million years? When did these changes occur within the proposed time frame? Why did they occur? Why, when, how, where? What selective pressures drove or tolerated them? How was the entirety of the heterochromatic arm lost in the chimpanzee Y? How did both lineages remain fertile and viable through these drastic changes? They like to appeal, at least the more informed evolutionists, to the Makova study. Makova study gives high quality Y chromosome assemblies, but it does not reconstruct. That's a huge point. In our debate, Matt will remember, I was challenging the evolutionists to do, well, how could we ever reconstruct it? How could we ever answer these questions that you have for us? That's their way of answering, basically admitting that they can't. Reconstruct the ancestral ape Y chromosome, identify directionality of changes, gain versus loss, quantify the rates at which those changes occurred, or provide any mechanistic evolutionary timeline. Instead, Makova confirms what? Y chromosomes are highly variable. The Makova study actually confirms what we've been saying for years on the Y chromosome, and the Makova study has actually strengthened the Y chromosome dissimilarity challenge. I love it. It's a great time to be a biblical creationist. Low in alignability, very low, and undergo rapid lineage-specific turnover. This strengthens the Hughes 2010 conclusion. 2010 to 2024, things have not gotten better for evolutionists, it's gotten worse. If the present day Y chromosomes are this divergent, reconstructing a reliable ancestor is even more difficult. Why does the Y chromosome challenge remain unexplained and unanswered? They think we got a challenge, we got a problem with the heat problem. No, we've answered that 3 different ways, 3 different consistent, balanced, and scientifically variable ways. But they have not addressed this challenge that precludes common descent. No ancestral sequence, no rate-based model, no fertility preserving pathway, no explanation for new palindrome families. See how comprehensive we're being here? No explanation for human to gorilla architectural similarity. No explanation for the 2-time size gap. No explanation for 70 to 86% unreliable sequence. I mean, I would hate to be an evolutionist in 2025. No explanation grounded in population genetics. Critics list mechanisms. Again, this is all they do. They list mechanisms, but never demonstrate. I'm not even looking at the live chat. I can imagine if there are critics, it's the same thing. Mechanisms, but no actual model. Until they do this, model it out, the Y chromosome gap remains a fatal problem for human to chimp common ancestry. Here we go, evolutionists. I want sophisticated answers to this, either in written form or in video form or in debate form. Which lineage lost what? What specific amplicons, palindromes, or gene families were supposedly lost in each lineage? What empirical evidence identifies those differences as deletions rather than independent origins? Where is the ancestral Y chromosome reconstruction? If loss is invoked, you must show the ancestral state. But the 2010 Nature paper explicitly states the ancestral Y cannot be determined. Without an ancestral reference, loss is just speculation. Why do humans have entire palindrome families and gene systems absent in Pan? If the differences are only due to loss, where did the human-specific structures with no chimp or bonobo analogs come from? How does a 2-time size difference arise purely by chance or by loss? Why does the human Y resemble the gorilla Y more than the chimp Y? Here's the biggest question. Where is the rate-based population genetic model? Show the duplication, the deletion, the recombination, and mutation rates required to produce what? Look at this, gentlemen. If separate ancestry is true, if what the Bible claims about independent origins, Adam the first man, Eve the mother of all living, we just read it, and we went over those passages for the first 10 to 15 minutes of this talk. If what the Bible claims is true, this is exactly what we would expect to find. If evolution is true, you need to explain new human-specific palindromes, reconstructed amplicons, loss of entire heterochromatic regions in Pan, the massive size gulf within 6 to 7 million years without breaking male fertility. I mean, good luck, but we're hoping to get some answers. Okay, the real Eve. Let's touch a little bit on Eve for my last 10 minutes, and we're going to throw it over to Matt. Genesis 9:19. Let's talk a little more about scripture. This is one of my favorite points. The critics have flopped to debunk the argument from the L, M, and N haplogroups. If you don't believe me, check my website article section. I did one general article a couple of years back refuting objections to this, and I just published another one on Patreon further refuting objections and criticisms. Genesis 9:19. These are the 3 sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. So if the whole earth is overspread from the 3 sons of Noah, well, obviously that was done through their 3 wives, the 3 daughters-in-law of Noah. Have a look at this visual real quick. This is a mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic tree. What do the lines represent? They represent DNA differences or mutations. So this is mutations in people groups over time. But how much time, you might be wondering? Okay, well, we know, and we're going to go through some papers soon, there are DNA diversity studies in the mitochondrial DNA that shows low diversity. Most positions are invariant, as in we have the same. Roughly 20 to 30, separating people from the Eve consensus sequence. The rate is fast. And we're going to be leaving note. This, as Matt said before we went live, super comprehensive. Okay, so the Bible says what? At creation, you have Adam and Eve. Then you got a couple thousand years, and then the flood. You got a massive bottleneck, the flood bottleneck. And then the earth, as we just read, is overspread, Genesis 9:19, through Shem, Ham, Japheth, and their 3 wives. Okay, mitochondrial DNA is passed down maternally. Okay, so for example, my wife passed on her mitochondrial DNA to my 3 kids. I have 1 daughter, 2 sons. My sons won't pass on mitochondrial DNA. They'll pass on Y chromosomes if they have boy children. My daughter will pass on her mitochondrial DNA. So we can build a family tree. And it turns out that that family tree goes back to a single woman just several thousand years ago, not a couple 100,000 years ago. But in mitochondrial DNA, you have haplogroups. You have 3 main major haplogroups. This is not even contested in the evolutionary literature, L, M, and N. Well, isn't that interesting? All mitochondrial DNA worldwide can be traced back. You see all these lines going right back to these 3 main starting points, these 3 main nodes, L, M, and N. And yet the Bible just said in Genesis 9:19 that from Noah's 3 sons and their 3 wives, the entire earth was overspread. Isn't it incredible? Isn't it fascinating that all mitochondrial DNA actually go back to 3 main starting points, these 3 main haplogroups? Now, wait a minute. Notice how those haplogroups are actually separated by short lines, because the critics will say, oh, well, they couldn't have lived together at the same time. They can't be contemporaries. They couldn't have lived contemporaneously. Sure, they could. The lines represent DNA differences. Those lines are short, separating the 3 nodes. The lines radiating out are long. So fewer DNA differences and then more DNA differences. The L, M, and N are separated by less than 10 from the last time I looked. That's trivial. So those lines separating L, M, and N could represent pre-flood differences. Fewer years, you got 2,000 years leading up to the flood. Plus, you got people living hundreds of years old. So you got massive overlap where you could have a grandchild. You could have a child living at the same time as their great grandparents because of that overlap. We don't really have that today because our lifespan is decreased so much. But when you're living hundreds of years old, yeah, you can be living at the same time as people who today you wouldn't be living at the same time with. So short lines demonstrating that, yes, they could have lived at the same time together. Okay, because they're going to say M and N came from L. No, not necessarily. And then the lines radiating out, that would be post-flood mutations. So 2,000 years to the flood, bottleneck, 3 women, 3 men, Shem, Ham, Japheth, their 3 wives, and then the whole earth is overspread. So you'd expect longer lines radiating out. And this is exactly what we see. It's incredible. The Bible demanded, as we read earlier, a single woman that every human being descended from. The evolutionary model did not predict this. When we look at worldwide mitochondrial DNA, the family tree collapses rapidly to a single person. This is Eve. Notice this from 2022. You'll find discrepancies between what's called the phylogenetic method and the observed empirical pedigree method. Estimates of the mutation rate with a non-phylogenetic approach, namely pedigree analysis, are reported to be approximately 10-fold higher than phylogenetically derived rates. We also know hypermutation is a reality. Notice this paper, fascinating. 2 families had genetic drivers of germline hypermutation. So if these evolutionists want to make arguments, assuming a constant or slow mutation rate, well, we actually have papers suggesting that some lineages under specific conditions, environmental, for example, can experience more mutations, a higher mutation rate. 2 families had genetic drivers of germline hypermutation, with fathers carrying damaging genetic variation in DNA repair genes. So imagine you have an isolated people group in the past, let's say after the flood, Neanderthals could be an example, where they have damaged DNA repair enzymes, living in harsh environments, living on top of radiation rocks. Well, they could be passing on 7 to 10 times the amount of mutations that a normal person would under normal conditions. which would inflate the amount of DNA differences or mutations that we'd find in their genetics. For 5 of the families, paternal exposure to chemotherapeutic agents, well, if you know anything about chemotherapy and radiation and the harmful negative effects associated with that, well, yeah, you could really expect that after the flood, especially with the radiation and heat and energy released due to the flood and being trapped in a lot of these rocks and post-flood environments. You have people groups living in certain caves and certain isolated areas on the planet. Then we'd expect some hypermutation to take place over the generations. For 5 of the families, so again, hypermutation is a reality. Okay. We also know, based on Fatuma, that the nearly neutral mutation rate approximates or equals the fixation rate, because evolutionists want to say, well, the per generation rate might be fast, the observed rate might be fast, but you're forgetting about the fixation, the long-term substitution rate. Well, wait a minute. The fact is, Fatuma, informed population genetics, geneticists know that the observed mutation rate approximates the fixation rate. And why? Well, because in the evolutionary model, this is what they don't get or understand or even respond to. In the evolutionary model, humans have only grown to the size that they are and spread out to all parts of the globe in recent times. If you were to take a long pen, human history, according to the evolutionary model, is just the tip of that pen. And the out of Africa model would suggest that humans live for thousands and thousands and thousands of years in Africa, in smaller populations, broken up into tribes, isolating themselves. Okay. They didn't spread out to all parts of the globe until later. So that means you'd have faster rates of fixation for most of evolutionary history. And fixation has only reached 0 essentially today in the recent past. So that means most of evolutionary history, fast fixation, just recently slower fixation. And so there's a counterbalance where your nearly neutral mutation rate, which is fast, approximates the fixation rate. Why this is amazing with the biblical creation model. Here's my model here. Matt and I have worked on this together. I also co-authored an article, technical article, that went through a pretty rigorous peer review process. Dr. John Sanford himself was involved in it. We published it a few years ago now, Chris Roop and I, Fixation Equilibrium. Okay. Powerful paper. I recommend people check it out. So after the flood, you have the earth restarting with 8 people. Notice up here, you've got 8 people, and then you've got growth. So you got Noah's 3 sons and their 3 wives are having kids. Their kids are having kids, so on and so forth. So you've got growth, but you don't have spreading out until the Babel dispersal. People debate maybe 1 to 4 to 500 years after the flood. Okay. Even if you go with the lower numbers, 100 years roughly after the flood. Okay. The people that you'd have at that point isolated at Babel, not spreading out yet. Remember, God had to confuse the languages to force them to spread out. So that means you have that time period of fast fixation. So notice phase 1 after the flood, you got fast fixation. Then you got the dispersal. So notice the arrow here and the timeline. So you've got the Babel dispersal, and then you've got 8 billion people today. So phase 3 would be modern low fixation, fast fixation, dispersal, modern low fixation. So what that means is you actually have today the observed mutation rate being fast in the mitochondrial DNA. From what I've seen studying all these papers on the issue, it's roughly 0.05 to 0.10. And this is more than enough to account for DNA diversity. So you got the flood, about 180 generations, 4,500 years till today. With that mutation rate and also equaling the fixation rate, we observe roughly 20 to 30 differences on average. And it explains mitochondrial DNA diversity beautifully. It's a beautiful model. Matt's going to be going over these papers showing the observed substitution rate, how fast it is, 20 times higher than expected by evolution theory. Notice that this is from Rob Carter. Dr. Rob Carter is awesome. He's done excellent work. He is a true warrior for the faith in young earth creation. And so he published a paper here in 2007 in the conventional literature, Mitochondrial Diversity Within Modern Human Populations. The worldwide human mitochondrial DNA consensus is composed of, we went over that earlier, about 16,500 letters, nucleotides. 84.1% of the mitochondrial genome is invariant. So what this is saying is there's very low variation in the mitochondrial DNA. On average, people are only separated by a few DNA differences. At most, it's between 120 to 140 in some deeper lineages, African lineages. Bring in the Neanderthals, it's even more. But for reasons that I explained earlier, we can account for deeper African lineages with more differences and Neanderthals. Notice this here on the slide. This is very interesting. This comes directly from Dr. Carter's paper. And this diversity graph shows that modern humans are overwhelmingly similar in mitochondrial DNA, with only a small number of differences. Have a look at this, the larger bar versus the shorter bar. So we have an overwhelming amount of differences that are in common, okay? But then only a small number of differences separating most lineages. The distribution is tight, it's peaked and young looking. This is biblical time that we see here. Exactly what we would expect if humanity began only a few thousand years ago with a small number of maternal ancestors. But if humans had been accumulating mutations for 100 to 200,000 years, the mitochondrial DNA should be much more diverse. These graphs should basically be opposite. Not where most of it is invariant, but with a lot more rare alleles, a lot more variation in the mitochondrial DNA, okay? The graph should basically be shifted to the right and rare variants should dominate, but we don't see that. Notice to the left that it's about 85% invariant, okay? And so the data simply do not match a deep time scenario. They powerfully fit the biblical time scale. Here's to make this technical point a little more understandable, okay? What we observe versus what deep time requires. Now, imagine mitochondrial DNA is like a candle that burns down at a known rate. So that's the mutation rate. That's the known rate that we can figure out and have figured out. Now, if the candle has been burning for 200,000 years, according to the evolutionary model, it should be almost gone. Tons of mutations piled up, high diversity, rare variants everywhere. But when we look at the candle, which you can take as mitochondrial DNA diversity, we don't find a candle burned down to the base. No, what we actually find is that the candle has only melted a little bit. There's only been a few changes since it's been lit. That is akin to what we see in the mitochondrial chromosome. The mtDNA candle has barely burned down at all. That means it hasn't been burning for 200,000 years. What does it match? It matches a recent origin just a few thousand years ago, exactly what the biblical timeline predicts. Picture this as the consensus sequence in the middle, okay? And a good analogy would be, let's say I were to write a book, and so I have a manuscript, and I hand it to 100 different people, and I tell 100 different people to copy it out by hand. Okay, everyone's going to copy it out, and every single person is going to make their own unique mistakes, because nobody copies by hand an entire manuscript perfectly. Now I take all the copies. Well, what I can actually do is discover what the original manuscript was. If I no longer have the original manuscript, I only have the copies, I can look at all the different copies, see what the unique variants are, okay? And then I can remove those from the equation, and then I can come back to the original manuscript. And that's basically what they've done with the Eve consensus sequence. A good close approximation to it. And so in the middle, you've got Eve, but you've only got a little bit of divergence. How long does it take to accumulate the 20 to 30 differences from an Eve starting point, and then max 120 to 140 in some African lineages, and then over 200 in Neanderthals? Very easy. Everybody's closely aligned. They haven't diverged much from Eve. And then even those that have diverged a lot, we can easily explain through things like hypermutation, environment, other factors. This is a phylogenetic tree from Dr. Rob Carter. He's done a lot of great work on this as well. And I already spent quite a bit of time on the phylogenetic tree that Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson derived. And I had the source on the other one. But in this one, there's an interesting point. So you see that starburst pattern, right? Well, that suggests explosive population growth from a starting point just a few thousand years ago. And that's what we would expect if the biblical creation model is true, where you've got 8 people, 3 reproducing couples, and then explosive growth. Now, you'll notice some of these lines are irregular. Take HVR. This is the most common haplogroup in Europe, if I remember correctly. And you'll notice that the lines, which represent DNA differences, they're variable. Some are shorter, some are longer. But then again, they all go back to a common ancestor. Well, that's interesting. What does that mean? Well, this confirms what I was saying earlier, confirmed from the conventional literature, that mutation rates can be variable. That means some people are picking up more mutations in the same amount of time than their cousins in order to go back to the same common ancestor. Well, that breaks the assumptions behind the evolutionary phylogenetic, the evolutionary molecular clock. This is a Y chromosome family tree, same thing. We have evidence for one man, few DNA differences. In light of the mutation rate is fast, biblical time that we're looking at. I want to go over a few rescue devices, then we're going to hand it to Matt. Time has flown by, but I wanted to be comprehensive because we said this would be super comprehensive. Let me get a quick sip, and then we're going to demolish some of these arguments from the critics. Purifying selection to the rescue. Pedigrees are already post-selection. As Dr. Rob Carter in his 2025 article, excellent article, explains, strongly deleterious mutations never enter pedigree data sets because they die with the carrier before reproduction. Thus, pedigree rates already reflect heritable, transmissible mutations. Sorry, evolutionists. Selection doesn't slow fixation throughput. Neutral theory, for example, Fatuma, shows fixation rate equaling mutation rate in equilibrium. The evolutionists just don't get it. I explained their timeline. I explained our timeline. And that's why there's a balance. There's an equilibrium where the neutral rate approximates or equals the fixation rate. Selection may shape which mutations survive, but the overall traffic flow. So even with selection, the throughput, the flow of these mutations entering still matches the incoming rate. Oh, what about non-synonymous versus synonymous proportions? We heard this from Dr. Zach Hancock. We've heard this from Dr. Stefan Frello. I've responded to both of them. Non-synonymous versus synonymous proportions do not undermine creation. They simply show that harmful mutations are filtered, right? The biggest mutations are seen by selection. They're filtered out. They're dealt with. But it's your nearly neutral mutations that accumulate unchecked. Creationists don't deny this. But this does not reduce the global throughput of fixation over generations. Synonymous is, I got it in quotations, silent changes, because they're not technically silent. They do have some effects. Non-synonymous equals protein altering changes that selection removes. This affects which mutations persist, not the overall mutation rate. Purifying selection is real. Let me make this clear. No creationist denies purifying selection. We understand what its role is, but it doesn't save the day for the deep time evolutionary model. But it's already baked into the pedigree signal. Critics keep using it as a hand-waving excuse. That's all we see from people like Dr. Dan Sterncardy now, because these issues are technical, and a lot of his audience, they're just looking for confirmation that they're related to banana plants and strawberries and walking sticks. They're largely not even understanding what Dan is saying, so he can gaslight his audience into thinking that he's actually addressed these arguments, these challenges, these objections in this model, but he has not. All he has done is dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. That is so clear to anybody who actually understands what they're talking about on this topic. Critics keep using it as a hand-waving excuse to explain away the data, rather than engaging the actual equilibrium principle. Oh, but what about these island studies? What about these other mutation rate studies that say that the mutation rate is slow and fits the evolutionary timeline? Let's have a look. Canary Islands. Well, firstly, we creationists, we can agree when a settlement has occurred, even according to the evolutionist timeline, within 4,500 years. So there's no issue there. That's not the problem. The problem is them extrapolating those numbers across deep time assumptions. Dr. Rob Carter made a good point in his 2025 article. He's already exposed how such anchors bake evolutionary timelines into the cake. Tristan da Cunha in Norfolk. Yes, settlement dates are known. Okay, no problem. But that doesn't eliminate demographic distortion. They want to take these examples of demographic distortion, these island populations, inbred populations, isolated populations, where obviously they're going to have a bit of a slower rate. And then he wants to extrapolate that as the global rate over all time. No, that's not how you do science. Don't you have a PhD, Dan? Small founder groups still flatten rates regardless of exact dates. And post-settlement genealogies can compress timelines further, skewing calculations. Unusual demographic context, which is all Dan. Dan is so desperate Dan. He makes a community post the other day promoting his video. Hey, go here so you can learn how to refute the evolutionists. Well, those evolutionists we've been debating recently have no doubt been looking to videos and arguments from people like Dan and Erica, but yet they're failing. So people like Dan are actually not doing a good job equipping their cheerleading squad to refute our arguments. So he posts a community post with a video that Matt and I actually responded to point by point months ago, which he didn't respond to. Unusual demographic context explain the apparent slowdowns. They are not evidence against the biblical timeline. Norfolk Island, we talked about that earlier. Tiny, inbred, isolated populations, flatten rates, drift, bottlenecks, and limited lineages distort global averages. Global pedigree studies disagree. Broader pedigree data sites across many families, as you're going to see with Matt, consistently report rates in the faster range, 0.05 to 0.1 range. Out of Africa. Well, what about the fact that, everything nests within Africa? Africa goes back to is the original founding population starting point, contradicting the out of Babel model. Well, a couple points. Epicenter bias. Diversity always clusters near the starting hub of dispersal. Africa's hotspot fits with Babel as the true epicenter, not with deep time. Mutation rate variation. We've already gone over at least one study that shows hypermutation. There's several more. Africans have documented, we're not making this stuff up. Africans have documented faster mutation rates in certain nuclear regions. There's a paper there from 2022. Diversity can be inflated by faster mutation, not just by time. Oh, but that's nuclear DNA. That's autosomal nuclear DNA. Yeah. And if that DNA compartment, autosomal biparentally inherited nuclear DNA, is mutating faster, that would also apply to other DNA compartments as well. Okay, they're still in the genome. They're still comprise a human. So those rates would also be affected. Diversity can be inflated by faster mutation, not just by time. Here's another interesting point. Recombination hotspots. Africans carry more PRDM9 hotspots, which means more recombination in shorter DNA blocks. This produces scrambled genomes without requiring hundreds of thousands of years. And a lot of these PRDM9 genes are degraded or broken over time through deleterious mutation accumulation, which means you go back to creation or go back to the flood when you have healthier genomes, more heterozygosity, more PRDM9 genes, more hotspots. You're going to have more scrambling. Less scrambling today, more scrambling in the past. Fits beautifully. Epicenter bias. Okay, we addressed that one. Higher pass recombination, just what I said. After the flood, humans had greater heterozygosity and intact PRDM9 sites. More heterozygosity, more PRDM9 sites, you can even see this in the conventional literature, means more scrambling, more variation, making recombination faster than today. Environmental stress likely amplified this effect. The massive shifts in environment after the flood. The evolutionary problem. Throw the challenge back on evolutionists. Here's their challenge. Here's their problem. If humanity were 200,000 years old, we should not still see large intact DNA blocks. Their persistence contradicts deep time expectations. If we've been evolving and experiencing recombination and gene conversion for a couple 100,000 years since we left Africa, or since the out of Africa theory places mitochondrial Eve, Y chromosome Adam. Okay, well then you should have a lot more scrambling, but yet we find these massive linkage blocks that appear to have experienced no recombination. That's interesting. That points to a youthful genome. Notice this. The PRDM9 gene controls the placement of recombination hotspots. Africans carry PRDM9 alleles that bind novel motifs and increase the number of hotspots compared to Europeans. That's right from the secular literature. Have a look at Hinch et al., Gray et al. This produces more recombination events per generation. The conventional literature is admitting this, independent of age. Well, it's not an age issue. Remember, I like to say, especially in geology, a process, not time. More hotspots equals more shuffling equals shorter linkage disequilibrium blocks. That's what LD means. This is a present day observation, not a marker of ancient ancestry. Higher heterozygosity correlates with higher recombination frequency. Immediately post-flood, humans carried far more heterozygosity than we observe today. That means recombination would have been faster in the past, not slower. Critics assume modern rates apply backwards in time, but evidence suggests recombination efficiency would have declined over history as PRDM9 sites degraded and heterozygosity decreased. Not only do we demolish the evolutionary position and the evolutionary understanding of the origin of humanity with the out of Africa theory, we model build. We provide a superior model. Environmental stressors, ionizing radiation, chemical exposures, and other stressors are well documented to increase recombination frequencies in model organisms and humans. The harsher post-flood environment would have amplified recombination activity, accelerating genomic scrambling beyond modern expectations. If recombination truly reflects hundreds of thousands of years, we should not still see large LD blocks today. So the actual problem is not for us, it's for evolutionists like Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal. The persistence of long blocks across the genome is a direct challenge to deep time, not to the biblical model. Conclusion, shorter LD blocks in Africans are best explained by higher hotspot density, higher heterozygosity in the past, and accelerated recombination under environmental stress, not by deep time. Here's a summary. And why I'm spending a lot of time on this issue is because this is what evolutionists, informed evolutionists, think is our biggest challenge to the out of Babel model. So it deserves a thorough rebuttal. Epicenter bias explains why Africa looks like a diversity hotspot without requiring Africa as the place of origin. Mutation rate variation shows diversity is not simply a function of time. Faster mutation rates in African populations inflate diversity measures. Recombination dynamics, for example, PRDM9, heterozygosity, stress, environment, explain shorter LD blocks without invoking deep time. Taken together, these mechanisms demonstrate that African diversity is not a problem for the biblical model. Instead, the data align with expectations from a Babel-centered dispersal just 4,500 years ago. What about phylogenetic nesting? Why does non-African populations nest within Africa? So they say Africa would be the starting point. Phylogenetic trees must be rooted somewhere. If researchers choose Africa as the origin, because Africa has the most diversity, but we just showed that that doesn't mean that it's the starting point or the originator, then naturally all other lineages will nest within African ones. But if the tree were rooted in Mesopotamia near Babel, then guess what? So this is an artifact or a side effect of where you put the root, of where you put the starting point. That's all it is. The nesting pattern would reorient accordingly. So you want that reorientation to show why creation can be true? Then don't root it or put the origin point based on your evolutionary assumptions. Look at the data for where it is, root it in a different spot other than the African origin point, and then you have a reorientation where now the nesting fits beautifully with the biblical creation model. The structure of the tree does not independently prove Africa as the origin. It only reflects the starting assumption. Africans have been documented to experience faster mutation rates in certain genomic regions and more recombination hotspots. I mean, we got it all. We can back up all these arguments from the secular literature. Faster mutational and recombinational activity naturally produces more branching and scrambling, which makes other groups appear nested within them, even if all populations share a recent origin. A couple more slides here and we're done. So Matt, get ready, brother, because it's marathon time for you next. Phylogenetic nesting is not independent evidence of African origins. It is a side effect of circular assumptions and local mutational dynamics. Once rooted in the wrong place, as evolutionists do, the tree will always point back to Africa, no matter what. So they're saying, well, what about the nesting? What about the phylogenetic issue? It's like, that's because of your choices of rooting and therefore interpreting it in light of a favorable view to evolutionary history. But when we allow the data to speak without assumption, the Babel-centered model fits perfectly. Localized diversity near the epicenter with subsets radiating outward, not a problem. What about Neanderthal divergence? Well, I responded to Dr. Stefan Frello. He's dodged those responses for the most part. And so evolutionists ignore evidence of accelerated mutation accumulation in Neanderthals due to small stress population, radiation rocks, for example, speeding up the mutation rate. Modern studies show hypermutation can occur at 2 to 7 times higher rates. So of course, if you have this isolated population that are affected negatively for many reasons, and then they pass on 7 times the amount of mutations than normal, well, then that's going to be a pretty long line on a phylogenetic tree that evolutionists are going to interpret as being a lot of time, even though it's just a couple generations. Post-flood radiation, isolation, and environmental stressors make this a perfect fit. Evolutionists also ignore the work that we've done on this topic, previous work. Okay, so here it is. Here's a summary. Here's why the critics have failed. Here's why the scientific data beautifully confirms and supports the biblical account of origins. Fixation equilibrium is backed soundly by the scientific data. Pedigree rates are fast. Fixation throughput equals mutation rate. Observed diversity matches biblical timelines. Demographics, environment, and genetics explain the outliers. The critics have had no coherent response. Fixation equilibrium still stands stronger than ever. And that's it, gentlemen. Hand it over to Matt.
Hey Donnie, your screen. I don't know what happened, but you didn't show any slides there. It went off the screen.
For how long?
I don't know. I thought that you did that on purpose, and then you mentioned your slides, and then I put a comment in the private chat, but I don't know exactly. So the last few slides probably didn't show.
Oh, okay. You
How
scared me
long
for
was
a
he
second.
like that?
So,
You thought it was the whole thing.
it was the whole thing?
No,
I'm messing with you, man. We saw it. I would have been texting you.
Yeah, that because literally I had my phone here the whole time just in case there's any issues. So if that was the whole time, whew, I would have retired. So it was just the first few slides.
It was like the
last two.
one.
Oh, last
the
few.
last
Okay,
one.
well that's as long as you know the first hour was shown because there was a lot of visuals there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, most of it was shown.
Oh,
But
good.
at first I thought you did it on purpose, that's why I didn't say anything. And then you mentioned your slides. I'm like, oh, he's actually trying to show slides.
Oh man, you should have told me. But that's okay. So it's just for like the out of Africa part.
I put it in the private chat. It's in the private chat.
We saw the haplogroups and stuff, so it was working fine then.
The haplogroups was so long ago, though. Did you see the? I'm going to share a screen real quick before Matt goes. I just want to know where. And just for further reference, when we're screen sharing, we can't see the private chat, so you'd have to text me. But if you screen share for me, brother, I want to know where.
I'll tell you what I'll do. If it does go off again, like when Matt does it and it goes off, I'll come on there personally and let Matt know, so that way Matt knows that the screen share messed up.
Okay, so
sorry, I was going to do that with you. I wasn't sure if I should.
Donnie,
that's okay.
Doki says the slide stopped 9 minutes ago.
Okay, 9 minutes ago. So did you see these two phylogenetic trees?
I've never seen the haplogroups.
Matt, were these on screen? The
once you told me to start getting ready, I was typing things in. I stopped watching your slideshow. I was just listening. I was gathering images.
Brian, do you remember seeing these slides here?
I've never seen the haplogroups.
Okay. And then Canary Islands. Okay, that's fine. Well, as long as Doki
said at PRDM 9.
Okay, that's not too bad then. All right, Matt, we're gonna hand it to you, and Hope everyone enjoyed that
Do you,
comprehensive breakdown.
okay. You already taken yours down, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Matt. Uh,
Any questions for Donnie that came in live? He can answer before he goes on a break.
well, I was just gonna wait till at the end of our video, or after you get done with yours, before we
Okay.
start asking the questions.
All
All right.
righty.
So, y'all ready?
Yep, I'm pulling up screen share right now. Here we go. All right, everybody. Now we get into a little bit more of the technical, detailed aspects of these mutation rates. We're going to try to cover a little bit of everything. We'll start right off from the beginning and why I believe this is the most important topic, because evolution literally deals with the diversity of life based on mutations. They are everything to evolution. So if they predicted that they would be slow and they're actually fast, it destroys evolution, because now they can't answer the most basic question of all, the diversity of life on Earth. But we can. And that's what makes our model so strong and so good, is that we have the ultimate in testable predictions. And they have to invoke storytelling and lies, essentially, because they just say, well, maybe this happened, and that's why it's so fast right now. But over time, it probably goes slow, just story after story. And of course, they throw in a little mix of truth somewhere. But as you're going to see today, it's not going to save them. It's a complete mess. The biggest problem that they have is the very origins of the story. Do they literally think that Adam and Eve were created like ghosts and shells that don't have any genetics in them whatsoever? And that just like one day maybe they just evolved an entire genome of DNA themselves? I don't really know, but our entire model is based on the fact that there was a human that was created by God originally. So therefore, they would have the biological things that we have in us today, which include genetics. So if they were created, then essentially they would have been created with a genome that would have been pure, and we can go backwards in time. That's why Donnie mentions and brought up the consensus sequence for Eve that he published in the peer-reviewed literature. That was Carter 2007. Now, that would have been the best that he had with the data set that was offered to him. Is it the absolute guaranteed mitochondrial Eve of the biblical time? Probably not, because he only had around like 860 genomes to run. But we can be pretty sure that it was very close to that anyway, simply because the variation in the population is very small to begin with. So that's what Donnie was talking about. So what I'm going to be going over today is we're going to be looking at the human cell, and then we're going to go inside that human cell and look at the mitochondria. Then we're going to go in the mitochondria and look at the mitochondrial DNA, which, if you guys know, there's 37 genes and there's different elements to the mitochondria. The mtDNA is what's being tested for these mutation rates, and why this is so important. Since this channel is Apologetics 101, I need to teach you guys why this is important. I'm going to be going over the detailed things as well, but that's not as important as you guys understanding why it's important. You might get some critics that come out later and just say, yeah, well, but this and but that. And we'll go over those criticisms. You can even throw in your questions for me, like when you like. But now you need to realize that overall, there's the entire mtDNA, this circle right here, is 16,569 base pairs. The green region right here is the vast majority of it, like 80 to 90%, right? And that is the coding region, because it codes for proteins. It's very conserved and it's very important. Then we have something called the control region. It's only 1,100 base pairs in size, and it does not code for protein. It just does transcription and very non-vital things. So it's a neutral region in the genome, in the mitochondria. So that region makes the best clock, because there's no selection removing mutations. So obviously you don't want to look at a region that's not working very good to be a clock. You can't tell the time very good. We'll get into that in just a minute. So essentially what's happening is that Adam and Eve would have been created without any mutations, and then from them, mutations would have been building up over time, and mutations increase. That's how we know genetic diversity is increasing. It's still increasing today. So that's how we would go, okay, we can go backwards in time to a time with less mutations. That's how we get to mitochondrial Eve or any mtDNA ancestor, any most recent common ancestor. That's how this works. Does that mean that every most recent common ancestor is the first created kind? Of course not. When they took a couple of Mouflon sheep and they left them on the Kruligan Islands and they repopulated the island, and you go there now and there's about 700 of them. When you test those 700 sheep, all of them are going to go back to the two ancestors that were left on the island. So then obviously they weren't the first sheep that God created. So those little founder effects are going to exist in the animal kingdom. Matter of fact, my personal view is that if anything's going to probably go back to creation, the best, it might be birds, because they don't worry. They're not stuck isolated on an island or anything like that, because they can fly. So the odds of them being bottlenecked down to a single pair is very rare in an entire species like that proliferates quickly. But with humans, it is the very first, because we have the biblical story to tell us that there was only a single bottleneck that was gigantic in the human timeline that could have done this. And as you will see from these studies that are published in the peer-reviewed literature, they land on the biblical date of creation. And that is astronomically improbable when it comes to pretty much anything in the evolutionary community, because obviously there was no bottleneck around 6,000 to 7,500 years ago in their model to account for a most recent common ancestor. And they admit this in the published literature. So what is there? There is creation versus evolution. Evolution theory predicted a slow rate of mutations that matched the fossil record, and we predicted that the rate must be fast to land on a biblical most recent common ancestor date. So what they do is they calibrate the molecular clock to the fossil record, and what Donnie said earlier, around 6 to 7 million years. Some say up to 14 million. Some say maybe down to 5 million. Either way, we're talking millions of years ago, there was a divergent split between us and primates. And I checked again just to make sure. There you go. Right on Google, it confirms. And yes, they're still doing that to this day. But what did we actually find? Because that's the most important thing. Well, we looked in the genome and we saw just a few mutations. Overall, when it came to fixed substitutions, there were very little, only around 21 in the entire mtDNA. So there were so few that they said, okay, well, that means over 7 million years, we should assume that there's a rise of one substitution per lineage every 500 to 600 generations. But what did we actually find? A rapid rate of one after 25 generations, after the expected 1 out of 590, a 200-fold increase than expected value. And this was the first observed pedigree rate study that was done going 11 generations back. So it was a deep-rooted pedigree, unlike what the critics like Dan say, no, you can only get this rate with single-generation pedigrees. That is not true. That is a myth. So let's read directly from the study itself on how perplexed they were when they got this. They said this range of mtDNA divergence rates introduces a troubling degree of uncertainty into the question of time since the origin of modern humans. But why? Because the origin of humans is now only placed a few thousand years ago, not even tens of thousands of years ago, let alone hundreds of thousands or millions, which is what they expected to find. So Ludstorm, he did 1992, was the first person to do a coalescence calculation running the math. Since then, it's only gotten worse for them. But before we get into that, we're going to look at a pedigree study that was done this last year. And it is really important to know this because it's going to show you the differences in the mitochondria regions. So, for example, when we look, They tested 119,211 people total. That's massive. And the pedigrees went back quite a few generations. I think overall, 17 generations up to 25. I believe that their deepest pedigree ancestor went back to 1410. So we're talking deep. Now, what did they find? Well, they tested each region that I mentioned earlier of the entire mtDNA, including the entire mtDNA, and they found that each region has a different rate. That's really important because the coding region, which the evolutionary community like to reach to, is a slower clock because substitutions, when they arise, sometimes there's a deleterious one and selection removes it. So therefore, the rate is a little bit slower in that region. So they like to use studies that focus directly on that region while ignoring the most valuable and important regions, which are the control region, which is 10 times faster, by the way, the 8 times faster, and the hypervariable regions, which are 10 times faster. Those regions are that way because they're neutral regions. So when Donnie says the mutation rate equals the substitution rate, he's talking about regions that are neutral, which these are. So therefore, they cannot invoke that selection just magically erases mutations that are arising because they don't arise there because they're not protein coding. They're trivial. And I can't see them if they do arise. So here we go. Now we're going to jump into this. As expected, our rate estimates are substantially higher than those from phylogenetic studies for the coding region as well. So, that's not good because they need the coding region to also agree with the evolutionary timescale because that's the slowest region that they can go to. So again, why does this matter? This matters because we see there's different clocks inside of us. There's the protein coding, the coding region, there's the control region, there's hypervariable region 1, hypervariable region 2 and 3, and then the D loop overall. So there's all kinds of different clocks. So what the evolutionists like to do is they'll cherry pick a particular study looking at like the protein coding region, right? And they'll say, this makes a great clock. Well, what do you think? The red represents how the area of the clock that you can trust. Every minute that ticks in here is actually 1 minute. But when you get outside of that clock, it might click for a couple minutes and then go backwards. Then it might just stop entirely. So for 80 to 90% of the clock, it's not a good clock. So why would you look to that as evidence for a molecular clock? Obviously you wouldn't. Or would you trust a clock that tells you good time 90% of the time or 95%? Of course you would. How about a clock that's 95 to 98% accurate? Exactly. Those are the clocks we're going to be looking at today because those are the clocks of the D loop and the hypervariable regions. And these clocks are the best because selection can't interfere with ruining the clock. So when we look inside the mtDNA, only about 5% of the hypervariable region 1 and 7% of the hypervariable region 2 sites show any mutational change across families. Mutations there are functionally neutral. So as you can see, the vast majority of the entire D loop is unchanged, and the ones that do mutate are neutral. So purifying selection isn't going to work. That's what the experts are going to even admit to you, as you'll see. So now we're going to jump over to the first pedigree study ever done. And that was what I was talking about earlier. After Ludstrom did that mathematical calculation on a coalescence based on what he saw and then ran the numbers, Hal actually did it in person using a deep pedigree to really get the numbers in there. And he found one mutation every 25 generations, or one substitution every 25 generations arising, and said this rate is 200 times faster than the evolutionary timeline expectations. And the present results, as well as those of Ludstrom 1998, suggest either a much more recent origin of modern humans, or, and then he gets to the only one, that maybe the clocks must be wrong because they don't agree with evolutionary time. As you're going to see, the clocks are correct, evolution is wrong, and these clocks land on the biblical timeline. What are the odds of that? I mean, come on. You can to deny it is just absurd. I mean, you really have to hate the biblical creation model to throw away the observed data in favor of a fairy tale, and then reach to these random studies that are just exceptions to the rule. So then along comes Thomas Parsons. He works for the forensics science lab of the FBI. So he has access to their blood bank, and it allowed him to go in with a team of 10 of the best geneticists on earth, by the way, and run mutation rates to determine what is the actual rate. Does it agree with Hal? Because his rate seems too fast. There's no reason it should be so quick. There must be something going on. So what did they do? They compared the mtDNA sequences of the two control region, that's what CR stands for, the hypervariable segments, because that's what they found recently were the best regions, the hypervariable ones, because literally their size, small, easy to test. Hypervariable region 1's 360 base pairs, and hypervariable region 2 is 310, very tiny, and their hotspots are only around 20 base pairs each. So they accumulate mutations at about the same speed too. So if there's like 10 or 5 in hypervariable region 1, there's going to be 5 in hypervariable region 2. So it makes it a great method to test. And what are their conclusions? That Eve lived about 6,500 years ago. And then and they published this right in the paper. Here it is for your own eyes. It says, our observation of the substitution rate, 2.5 per sites per million years, is roughly 20-fold higher than would be predicted from the phylogenetic analysis, the evolutionary divergence, right? Our empirical rate to calibrate the mtDNA mutation clock would result in an age of the most recent common ancestor 6,500 years ago. Clearly incompatible with, obviously, what they believe to be true, evolution. So the critics say, no. That only is true if you look at the single generation pedigrees, and the deeper roots are going to erase those mutations over time, because basically saying these geneticists are idiots and they counted somatic mutations when they shouldn't have, and they were probably including heteroplasmy because they can't tell the difference. In reality, they didn't publish the fastest rate that they saw, which was 1 out of 17, which would actually place mitochondrial Eve 3,400 years ago. So they saw that fast rate, and they said that is probably not correct, because that just seems unusually high. We haven't seen anything like that before. So we're not going to go with it. And we're also not going to go with the slow one, the Amish family, because Amish people seem to be an outlier. For some reason, them as a people group mutate very slowly. They don't know why. They think maybe because they have a later generation time, or maybe they live in colder regions. They've thrown out all kinds of possibilities, but no one to this day has been able to figure it out. And they still are mutating slowly to this day. So what does that tell you? If there's ones that can mutate slower, there's people that can mutate faster. But regardless, they published the Oxford family, which was one substitution every, it was like 32.6. So they rounded up. Every one out of every 33 generations was what they actually published. And that pedigree rate goes back about 5.9 generations on average. So they published a rate that was a genealogy going back almost 6 generations on average. So yeah, not a big deal. Then the following year, because the critics actually didn't like the study, they were shocked. They said, this can't be true. And so they said, I'm going to refute you. A couple of papers came out trying to refute Parsons. Howell defended him. And then a critic said, I will join you, and we'll put this to rest. So he was joined the following year by Holland. And Holland actually ran the study with the rest of the team, and he actually confirmed the rate a little bit faster even, and it was one substitution every 30 generations. So this was it. This was the study, and they did both blood from the English family and the blood samples from the FBI again. They observed 4 substitutions after 121 transmissions, and 1 out of 32, again getting the exact same results basically. And once they published this, guess what? They flipped out again. And they said, well, and Ann Gibbons, who's an evolutionist, by the way, this is her. She's definitely not a creationist. She wrote a paper, and this guy right here said, or she posted, I think, using this new clock, she would be a mere 6,000 years old. She wrote the paper, but it was this person who said it. I threw him in there because I found out he was the one who wrote that chapter. So they're referring to themselves as evolutionists. One, that's what I find funny, because you know how they hate that today. Well, that was the term they gave themselves, and now it triggers them today. No surprise there, right? Triggered from everything. But here we go. They're admitting Eve lived around 6,000 years ago using these rates, and they're worried about it. They don't like it at all. I can see why. So again, why does this matter? Because we're looking at the best region in the mitochondria where there is no rescue device. You can't invoke selection. You can't, and you definitely can't invoke background selection, because background selection doesn't work unless purifying selection works. They're like conjoined twins. And when purifying selection removes a mutation, background selection is right there to grab everything that it's bound to and pull it away with it. Basically, what I mean by that is, I want you to picture every finger on my hand is a base pair, right? And we get a mutation right here on my middle finger. Okay. So now what's going to happen is that finger's in trouble. It's got a mutation on it. So selection comes in to remove it. And as it's taking it away, background selection grabs all the alleles around it and it takes them with them. So boom, it just drops genetic diversity. It removes them. But background selection can't do anything if purifying selection isn't doing anything. So you can't just say, well, background selection, that'll take care of it. How? Background selection can't do anything on its own. So yeah, invoking background selection is even a worse argument than purifying selection is. And that's already a bad argument, because look, they've already admitted in these papers that selection isn't what's causing the discrepancies between these phylogenetic mutation rates and the pedigree mutation rates. They've already accounted for it. They've looked for it, and it's not occurring. That's why the single generation pedigrees are just as accurate as the 6th generation, the 11th generation, the 30 generation, which you're about to see. So if every single one agrees with each other, why in the world would you invoke that there must be something slowing it down that's impossible to see, that we don't see and don't know about, and it's not occurring in the studies? That's the worst rescue devices ever. People got to stop this nonsense. It's ridiculous. They're admitting that they've looked for purifying selection, and it's really not happening there. How could it? It's not a region that's important to the body. So here we go. We've got people invoking rescue devices that literally can't work in regions that are basically as neutral as you can get, and they're fighting it only because it's landing on these biblical timelines. There's no other explanation. And what do they say about this? The observed substitution rate from both blood samples and cell lines greatly exceed evolutionary rates inferred from phylogenetic studies. You'll see that time and time again, consistently. So evolution theory is based on mutations. So if the mutation rate is fast and they require it to be slow, that changes everything. And when you Google how old are humans, you get they evolved in Africa. They'd love to throw that in there, about 300,000 years ago. But wait, why are they ignoring the obvious? They are literally lying to you, because the observable evidence says the opposite. They're still giving the whole population the lie, the assumption. Why? Because they need evolution to be true. They don't want to tell people, by the way, the observable evidence that has no good answers, that's still getting the same results over 3 decades of time, is literally telling us, no, the humanity is young and everything about it is young and branching out recently. But no, we're just going to tell you the evolutionary lie, even though there's no actual evidence to back it up. So when people read this from Ann Gibbons, they go, but nobody thinks that's the case. Well, the question to ask yourself is, who cares? The author's personal view of the past is more important than the actual results of the study. I don't care what they think. I care what the evidence says. And the evidence says the author's opinion doesn't matter. The evidence does. And that's why Ann Gibbons here actually wrote, but her own words, by solving the mystery of the Romanov remains raised another puzzle that the first troubled the forensic experts and is now worrying evolutionists, that it could also complicate the lives of evolutionary scientists. who used this mtDNA mutation rate clock to date such key events to when human ancestry spread around the globe. Evolutionists have assumed that the clock was constant, ticking off a mutation every 6,000 to 12,000 years or so. Regardless of the case, evolutionists are most concerned about the fast mutation rate, and they should be. And they are today. They're definitely scared. Why do you think they hate this so much? They hate this data because it completely refutes them and it destroys all of evolution. They cannot explain the diversity of life on Earth if the mutation rate is exactly like we see it. And it is. And that's what's devastating. So the FBI still uses this mutation rate to this day, so it must be pretty good. Real life examples. And then we have Hal. He came along and he admitted in this Ann Gibbons paper that yielding the overall divergence rate, which is the split, of one mutation every 25 to 40 generations. He's talking about Parsons here. He said, both of our studies came to a remarkably similar conclusion, says Hal. Those studies were published in the late 1996 in the American Journal. And here was the rates. I posted them right down here so you can see 0.25 reported by Hal and 0.28 by Parsons. And guess what? You're going to see that again and again and again. But here it is. As in other studies, our estimate is much higher than those obtained by phylogenetic methods. And then in 1997, the same year, we have Mum, who came along and he tested hypervariable region 1. And he found one substitution every 55 to 59 generations. So here's the question. Wait a minute. If he tested one region and hypervariable region 2 obtains the same mutations one does, and then you take, let's say, the high rate of one every 59 or 60 generations, and you cut that in half, now all of a sudden you have one mutation every 25 half of 60, 30. Oh, look at that. It's Parsons' rate. One out of every 30 generations. Oh my goodness. What a shocker, right? Another scientist running his own study. The pedigree goes back probably 5 or 6 generations, and he gets the exact same rate yet again. This is no coincidence. But we can go even further, and we can jump over to 2012. Deep-rooted, even says it in the study title itself, which is kind of funny. They ran their own substitution rate, and look at the rate. Oh, look. Remember how on Parsons, 0.25? Oh, my goodness. There it is again. Lo and behold, a deep-rooted pedigree study lands on exactly Parsons' rate. But you got to be like, well, wait a minute. They published a most recent common ancestor data of like 7,300. Yeah, you know why? Because they used a 28.3 generation time. That's going to change things. Parsons published a 20-year generation time. So the reason that the dates change at all isn't because of the dates that they're getting, the data. It's because of the generation time that they're using in the study. It's just time and time again. But then we go to a massively deep pedigree, one of the largest I could ever find. I think it goes back 32 generations. It's just massive. Look at what they found. It's the exact same, by the way. Hypervariable region 1, 221 generations ago, 6,600 years. Hypervariable region 2, about 275 generations. They combined them about 7,425 years ago, or 247 generations ago, is the midpoint for the most recent common ancestor of all. Adjusting to Parsons' study using a 20-year generation time, you have the most recent common ancestor living 4,940 years ago. So the rate is even faster. But wait a minute, I thought the rate was supposed to get slower over time. I thought the deeper the pedigree was going to be, the more selection was going to come in and save the day and slow the rate down for evolution. Uh-oh, it did the exact opposite. They're in so much trouble, it's ridiculous. They're just fighting the inevitable at this point. But then we have another study, 2012, Magradal. Here she promoted, another one. We found the rates 13 to 42 times higher than most phylogenetic estimates for hypervariable region 1. Shocker, I know at this point. Then we have Christina Santos, 2005. They counted 11 substitutions out of 321 transmissions. Basically, one mutation every 29 generations. Same as Parsons. What a surprise. But what did they do in their study? They actually said, well, the typical, this is too fast for evolution. We must accidentally be counting somatic mutations, or maybe these are heteroplasmies that are going to drift away and not actually become fixed. Don't even count them. So they just removed 6 mutations from their final conclusion. Bravo, bravo. Way to do science. Next person, just last year, this is the largest study that we went over earlier, where they actually tested the different regions of the mitochondria, as I was talking about, and found that there was a difference between the D loop and the coding region, and how much of a difference it actually was, 8 times faster. And he published his rate right here, which got the exact same thing again. Surprise, surprise. So we have pedigree depths going back in 10 studies that I mentioned that we go over. And look, there are no single generation pedigrees that are published in the literature. They all go deeper than that, every one. So yes, some of them definitely have deeper, are single generation like Parsons, but it doesn't matter because they went over their work and they published the other rates, not their single generation ones. So again, that's just another bad rescue device, like usual, by the critics, out of desperation to ignore all of this. And there's nothing they can do about it. And that takes us to Donnie and I's study that we just did. So I found a study in 1999 that found that the most diverse person on Earth is an African sample of 14.1 mutations. The average is around 8 in people today, but this is the most diverse. It's 14. So here's the question. 14 maxed fixed substitutions in the D loop, maybe around 6 in hypervariable region 1, maybe around 8 in hypervariable region 2, because it ticks a little bit faster, but not much. So we ran our own study, said, hey, look at this. Let's see what's going to happen as we use the variation from these studies, from Howell all the way to the most recent one, which was Agnar Helgeson, that said, maybe it's as slow as 1 substitution every 45 generations. Okay, let's use that. Break it down right through the middle, and we get about 34.48 generations. There's a coalescence calculation. We land again about 6,500 years ago with a 25 to 30 year generation time. Everything lines up so well. And then you can do a fixation rate based on the biblical scenario, and anyone can do it because everyone has access to AI now. So there's no excuse. And so when you see studies like this, the present study, as well as those of the Leadstorm, suggests that either a much more recent common ancestor to modern humans, or the evolution of the mitochondrial genome is not a reliable clock. What do you think? Decade after decade after decade, improving the technology that we have, and we still get the same results we got 30, 20 years ago, landing on the exact same date. Obviously, selection isn't slowing anything down. Obviously, the region is neutral. And obviously, we see the maximum amount of fixed differences with this such a low amount of fixed differences with a fast mutation rate. Come on, people. There's only one answer to this. Why is it landing on the biblical timeline? It's so obvious. So critics go, you guys only talk about Parsons. Yeah, we usually only do bring up Parsons. Do you know why? Because we usually don't go on tirades for hours trying to talk to people about this subject. We usually just bring up one because most people are like, okay, that's cool. That's all I need. That's amazing. That's great. They don't think we're liars like the atheist. And so I just say, okay, let's just prove it. Let's just go through tons of studies and then rip them to shreds. And what do? They'll point to little tiny studies. Well, what about this one? It's like, it's great. And then you read it. It's like, they're not even trying to get a substitution rate. Why did you bring that study up? It's a study about who's related to who. And they published a mutation rate because they did it, but that wasn't even what they were trying to do. So they did a sloppy job, and they would only count like fixed substitutions or something like that. And the critic doesn't even know that, because all they're trying to do is look for any substitution rate study they can do to slow the clock down or to not find a mutation to go, ha, we got you. Ignore 99% of everything else. It's just so pathetic and so desperate. Anyway, so if all of these experts in their field of genetics are wrong, why? How are they wrong? Don't tell me that pathetic excuse of background selection is probably doing it. That's just dumb. Mutation rates. This is another example of multiple examples that puts a time limit on the entire humanity, animals, which we will go over next if you want to. But check this out. We also don't have it in genetics and pedigree mutation rate studies. We also have it in genealogies. So genealogical studies and rates and mathematical simulations get the exact same thing, except there's a little caveat down here. Every time the most recent common ancestor falls in Asia, not Africa. Isn't that easy? Interesting. I mean, so what do we have here? We have a genealogical paradox that falls into place with the pedigree paradox. We have the same thing. Population growth only goes back about 5,000 years. You know what else does? Population growth rates. Uh-oh, that's not good. We have the diversity of haplogroups exploding out of the same region. And you can track that from a published study where they tracked SNVs to the point where all of humanity diverged from one another. And they said, wow, the maximum likelihood is 5,115 years ago. Humans just seem to branched out. And where they branch out from? Exactly where we said they did. What are the odds? The Bible said, God got a prediction, didn't it? Maybe people spread out from Babel. Where was that from? Oh, look, right there. And you're probably thinking, well, you know, what's going on? Why did they come from the Eastern Asia? Well, because remember, the Bible says that they migrated from the east to Babel in the land of Shinar, which is the Babylon today. So they did land somewhere over there and then migrate over. It's amazing. The evidence in science is confirming everything the Bible has ever taught. It is so good for us. So critics attacking the results of these pedigree mutation rate studies because they think that we need to take evolutionary assumptions into account. But that's the entire question we're trying to answer without assumptions. We're challenging the fossil record with observable data, and the fossil record is wrong every single time. So why would we believe it? We're going to believe genetics, and genetics confirms the biblical scenario and the biblical timeline. It's amazing. So we get over here, we got Aaron Raw, you know, SpongeBob specialist galore over here teaching people, oh, these things are these stupid, you know, they don't know what they're talking about. Meanwhile, he doesn't know about any of these things. And what he's heard secondhand. Somebody brought up one of these pedigree mutation rates, Vish vaguely said, you know, the most recent common ancestors only a few thousand years ago. He said, oh yeah, I've heard of this study before, but you can only get that if you use the fastest of the fastest rates. That, you know, that's the only way they can do it. It's like, what? So he doesn't know anything about the studies. He doesn't know what their rates are. If they use the fastest rate, even we're in trouble because the most recent common ancestors are like 3,400 years ago. It doesn't align even with our timeline. So no, it's devastating to them because they need it to be so slow. You got to go somewhere back to the evolutionary timeline, and they can't do that. That's why they ignore the D loop and go right to the coding region where they can invoke selection, and then they'll anchor their timeline onto a known historical date and say, look, we'll use this mutation rate, and then we'll invoke that selection's even stronger than it is over that amount of time. And then we can just keep extrapolating that back in time, and then look how everything lines up perfectly. It's like, what do you do? You just made up your own timeline. You just anchored it something real, and then anchored it, and then move that into the fake past, and then say, look how that proves it. No, that doesn't do anything. It's just ridiculous concept. It's basically like, okay, we're just going to retrofit the data and then show everybody how well it worked. That's not how science works, guys. That's pathetic. That's desperation at its finest. And then here's the nail in the coffin, the death blow. Animals. So everyone's thinking, oh, well, you know, it's just an anomaly. It's just happening in humans. No, this is happening in animals as well. And when they studied whales, we know that when whales started to be killed off and bottlenecked during whaling, and guess what? They decided, hey, let's run a pedigree mutation rate study on whales and determine if that aligns with the population bottleneck of the whaling event, or does it agree with the fossil record of when whales supposedly evolved. And look at that. You get exactly the pedigree rate aligns with the historical rate. And look at the phylogenetic rate over here on the left. Way off the charts. Not even anywhere close. So again, pedigree rates to the rescue, aligning with a literal documented history. But it doesn't end there. Here's one that's in our study, by the way, that's coming out real soon on horses. It again aligns perfectly with when they were documented from domestication, basically, for racing. And then we have mummified cats. I love this one because mummified cats go all the way back to ancient Egypt. So we can get a very deep-rooted ancestry of cats and modern day cats and say, okay, well, if we go back a couple thousand years to when these were mummified, when did the ancestor of those cats live? So if we get a cat that's been mummified 2,000 years ago, when did the ancestor of that cat live? Because remember, we just jumped back 2,000 years. So the ancestor of that cat must go back around 2,000 years or so as well, right? Somewhere around that time period. Guess what? It did. The study itself documents right when around cats start being documented in Egyptian hieroglyphics and being talked about as being pets is exactly when the mutation rate lines up with the creation of the first domestic cats from wild cats in Egypt. Amazing. And then, of course, one of the last ones we're going to go over is the chicken study. It goes back 50 generations, so it would be considered a deep-rooted pedigree. And they would think, because this one's the entire mtDNA, including the protein coding region where the selection is taking an effect, guess what? They found 2 substitutions in the region when they should have never been able to find that many. And they admit that, again, this is not good. They say right here, this is substantially higher than the avian rate based on fossils. And the study showed that it's 15 times faster than the evolutionary assumptions. So again, devastating for evolution in every corner. Every time they take a step around the corner, it just gets worse for them. And then they go into plants. Plants have it too. Oh man, poor guys. They're never going to win this. It's just so bad for them everywhere. So indirect phylogenetic mutation rates based on fossils fail to meet the evolutionary predictions. Pedigree-based creationist mutation rates are consistently found 10 to 20 times faster than evolutionary phylogenetic rates across all life, and it just devastates evolution. So I covered a lot there, and we could wrap it up because that was long. So let's go. If not, I can keep going. Don't worry about it. Oh, you're there. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. That's awesome. I was actually trying to put a question in here. Your plan, Matt. You need to get your let me remove it there. You might want to stop your screen or something.
Oh, sure.
Stop your.
All right. Is that better?
Yep.
All right.
All right. So that was a lot to unpack here. Is Donnie with us or?
Yeah, my bad. It gets intense. It's a hard subject. But
oh no. I loved it. I loved every minute of it.
All right, good.
All right. I didn't expect you to finish so abruptly. I was like, oh,
yeah,
I kind
of yeah. I got to the end of that row and I was like, I better just stop because I saw the 2-hour mark. I was like, I better just relax a little because I can keep going. I have like thousands of pictures. It's just crazy. I'm like, we probably did maybe like 100 at most on that one. I have so many rows. It's just ridiculous. That's why I decided let's do a study and where we can go over the details of those. That's what I sent you yesterday. So you and your audience now have a sneak peek at Donnie and I's mutation rate study where we go over all of these in depth and show our side, how the critics are purely ignorant on this subject or why they hate it so much. Either one is bad, but regardless, they've got nothing. They've got nothing but complaints. And it's pretty pathetic because it's their own scientists that are saying, hey, look at this. How do we solve this? And they're saying we really can't. We can't invoke selection. We can't invoke background selection. We can't say that the rates are wrong. We keep getting them everywhere we look, no matter how deep we go in pedigrees. So until something else, and we'll just keep running studies. And every time they do, every year, it confirms it again and again. And it doesn't just confirm it like, well, that study got like 4 and, or 1 substitution every 4 generations. And that one got 1 every 150 and like, 200, 300. It's not all over the place like that. It clusters around exactly what Parsons found. Notice that? That's amazing right there, considering the studies were so long ago. They were like, you could tell from the images that I took, the screenshots, that it looks like they're on a typewriter, doesn't it? It looks really old school. It's like they're typing it up on a typewriter. It's really crazy to me. because it's like, wow, I would expect a quill, quill and pen. And there they are, proving it right after 30 years. Incredible.
Hey,
Well,
Donnie, I see where you're trying to share your screen. Did you want me to put that
yeah,
on there?
I wanted to go over a couple of these points and maybe get Matt to expand on them a little bit too, because our goal, one of our goals for this talk, this seminar on mutation rates, was just to put the topic to bed. And what I mean by that is address very extensively the critics' best arguments. And so we know people like Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal, he loves repeating already debunked talking points. And so I wanted to highlight even more, especially because some of these slides did not show at the end. So it might be a good opportunity to reiterate some of the points. But anyways, Matt, as you know, brother, people like Dan, they like to say, oh, well, we're cherry picking studies, or we're ignoring other studies that seem to confirm what they're saying, that the mutation rate is slower.
Yeah.
And goes
Cherry
back
picking
a
study
couple
is why they
hundred.
cherry pick a study.
Right. Yeah. So in my slides here, would I be right to say that people like Dan are looking to demographic distortions? For example, here, the Canary Islands, Tristan da Cunha, Norfolk. So basically looking to studies dealing with mutation rates in smaller inbred isolation populations, and then committing an extrapolation fallacy by using those studies, those exceptions to the rule. The rule is global pedigree studies indicate a fast rate, okay, right in line with biblical time. But then he wants to take these isolated cases that give a slower rate for obvious reasons, okay, contextually, and then contradict what global pedigree studies are giving us.
Yeah, they really like pointing out a couple studies in particular, just a handful though, but they're always studies that do something very, very different than the other studies. Like, for example, in one of them, the study only counted homeoplastic fixed substitutions. They didn't even look at all at heteroplasmic mutations, which are known to drift to fixation. So if you're running a substitution rate, you're going to be looking at those types of mutations to count them in your study, because you're looking for the arrival of new mutations. When they don't do that, they're just looking at the end conclusion and saying, well, the rate must be slow. So they're not trying to do a mutation rate study, for example. So that's what Sudyal 2007 did, right? They didn't even try to do a mutation rate study. But they go to it and they say, well, look at the mutation rate. It's real slow. Well, yeah, it's because it's not a mutation rate study. They wrote one down, they published one, but they weren't trying to even get one. They were only trying to get who's related to who. So that study is already written off because it's pathetic. It's not meant to be a mutation rate study. Then you go to another one and they're like, well, look, that one's slower. And then what do you find? Of course, it's a particular study where, again, they took evolutionary concepts into it and they just didn't count certain mutations, or they removed them because they're like, well, we filtered out the data, or we set a really high filter on heteroplasmic mutations that we didn't see anything below 30%. It's like, what? Well, why? So they take their evolutionary mindset and they implement it into a lot of these studies. Even some of the studies that I presented today, those are the results if you read the data. But some people might go to those studies and say, but look, they published a slow rate. Exactly. Of course they did, because after their evolutionary mindset, where they filter the data and they calibrate it, they publish a slower rate. But when you read the study, you see every single time they get the same rate. So what do? Just like they complain about ginseng. Well, those studies on the Y chromosome, they don't they published a slower rate. Where did ginseng came out? He just made that up. No, he didn't. He took it directly from their supplemental data. He can read between the lines, and he's saying
evolutionists can't do is read between there's a lack of critical thinking skills, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I was like, me and you should just do this study and go in detail about all of these studies. And that's exactly what we did for everybody. So when people have questions like, what are the arguments against this? Well, now you have our study to go to, because it'll clear up all of the arguments from the critics, because we'll go over those studies. There's
So
only,
what
like I
about
said,
when
there's only a
people
handful.
So what about when people like Dan say, well, the studies you're looking at, like Parsons, it's only a few generations, and that's not enough to give us a good mutation rate, because those are going to be filtered out anyways. They're going to be lost for a number of factors that they'll point to. What's a good response?
One, that was his assumption, because he thought they were single generation. I showed earlier that they're actually not a single
So he was
generation.
wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so he's actually wrong. The published data that they did was on the Oxford line, which is 6 generations deep. The following year, they published 2 rates, and one was about 2 to 3 generations, and the other one was 5 to 7 generations. So again, they published the data from deeper anyway. So it doesn't really even matter what their opinion is. So he got that wrong. So not only is he wrong right out the gate, he's wrong that selection is even slowing it down to begin with. So remember, his whole thing is you only get this fast rate if you look at a single generation. Well, Parsons didn't do that to begin with. And even if he did, the rate is exactly the same anyway, because selection isn't slowing it down.
Right.
So who cares if it's 1? It could be 1 to 30. It's the same rate every time. So what do we know from that? We know that you can't invoke selection for the region. It's neutral. So they've lost their favorite and really their only rescue device.
Which means, and so many good points. So Brian, bringing you into this, do you see now, and to the audience as well, Rebecca in the live chat, good to see you, sister. It's a blessing to see that Rebecca can see that Dan is simply dodging and repeating and not engaging. So do you see that purifying selection doesn't save the day for them? These other mutation rate or so-called mutation rate studies don't work for them. Background selection, all these different arguments, right? So do you notice how fascinating this data is? For example, here from 2007, Rob Carter's paper, Mitochondrial Diversity Within Modern Human Populations. Notice how one bar is extremely large and the other one is short, showing a distribution where basically all humans are overwhelmingly similar in the mitochondrial DNA, with only a small number of differences separating most lineages. But if deep time evolution were true, in light of the mutation rate, then these bars should be totally different. We have more diversity, so this should be higher. It should be skewed. This should be higher. This should be lower. And a good analogy here, what we observe is if you were to walk into a room and you're wondering how long has this candle been lit? Well, if it was lit for a long time, or if the mitochondrial DNA, if the mitochondrial chromosome has been inheriting mutations, accumulating mutations for a long time, well, then you'd expect a lot more diversity. In terms of the candle analogy, you'd expect it to be almost gone, depleted quite a bit. But what we actually observe is that the candle hasn't been lit and burning for very long, and the mitochondrial chromosome has not been accumulating mutations for a long time. That's why you can look at the mitochondrial consensus sequence, where you've basically got Eve in the middle. And the question we're concerned with as creationists, how long does it take from Eve, from a created sequence? Because evolutionists are going to say, well, Eve consensus sequence is a coalesced sequence. So it's not the original, it's not a created sequence. So how long does it take to accumulate the differences that we see? Well, if you actually plot the differences around the Eve consensus in the middle, okay, you're going to have, and you do it through dots, most dots are going to be very close to the sequence, because most people are only separated by a few DNA differences, with a few being further out, right? Let's say in African lineages, and they're differing by what? Maybe 120 to 140, Matt. But as we went over here, we have plenty of good responses for why some African lineages have more mutations. I mean, right from the conventional literature, I went over at least 1 or 2 papers that show mutation rates are higher in certain regions. But the nesting. So notice this, the phylogenetic nesting. I don't think this slide showed up in my presentation. Maybe Matt, you can speak to this a little bit too. And so we got Africans. They've been documented to experience faster mutation rates in certain genomic regions. There's one from 2022. More recombination hotspots. Okay. So faster mutational and recombinational activity naturally produces more branching and scrambling, which makes other groups appear nested within them, even if all populations share a recent common origin. Okay. So epicenter bias, basically everything's going to nest according to where you put that root, where you put that starting point. So of course, evolutionists are putting it in Africa and then interpreting the nesting pattern as meaning that Africa's older. It's an older population, and we all come from Africa long after 6,000 years. Okay. But that's what I call the epicenter bias, because wherever you put that hub of genetic diversity, so put it in the Middle East, then the nesting pattern reflects the out of Babel model, because the evolutionists are taking realities like Africa has higher genetic diversity, and then they're rooting according to that assumption, even though the amount of diversity is not necessarily linked to time, but certain processes, environmental processes, mutation rate processes, variable mutation rates. I showed you in the mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic tree here that some lines are longer than other lines, and they're going back to the same common ancestor. So that means some people are picking up more mutations in the same amount of time than their cousin, which means mutation rates are variable. Anyways, does that make sense? And Matt, as you know, the critics like Dr. Dan, one of their favorite and their best arguments is the phylogenetic nesting. But the nesting is basically a side effect of where they place that root.
Exactly. And that's, like you said, there's so many assumptions that go into that I think one of the best answers is just using basic logic. So for example, when you're trying to determine genetically if somebody's older than somebody else, and you can only test like, a couple groups of people, and you're looking inside evolution, since they go, well, the mutation rate is the same in all people, and therefore they have to accumulate mutations at the same rate. Well, when it comes to fixed differences, actually population size makes a huge difference. And so I'm going to share my screen real quick, and you will see when you type in what people group in Africa have the highest mutation diversity. You find an African hunting group and pygmies, very small tribal populations that have existed in mostly isolation, probably, and they definitely don't have farming and agriculture. So what are they going to do? They're going to stay in small tribes, and they're going to have rapid generation times, and they're going to gather mutations quick, and mutations that arise are going to drift to fixation quickly because the tribes are smaller, just like Neanderthal, and they're going to rapidly look older than populations that are growing in population and expanding. Because remember, groups that stayed together, that created civilizations like Egypt and migrated around and created other civilizations, got into farming and agriculture and produced grain, which could feed a massive population. Africa didn't do that. So the populations that lived there stayed in smaller groups, and that is why they have more diversity. It really is just that simple. Oh, and I guess that's good. I saw another question there, but it's okay. All right, let me close that out.
Ryan,
oh yes,
over to you, brother.
Wow. Wow, you guys didn't want to leave any stone unturned, did you?
When we said super comprehensive, we
yeah,
meant it, brother.
Yep.
right. On those haplogroups, what is their how does the evolutionists try to respond to that? On that,
Are you
The
referring
L
to-
M haplogroup tree?
yeah.
Donnie's
What's
favorite? Yeah.
their most common response?
They say, nah, the people come from L. They don't come from the other ones. They said L is the root, and L3 is the one where everybody branched off from, and you have to root it in Africa. That's their explanation. Just like I said earlier, because Africans have the most diversity, they're assumed to be the oldest people group, so therefore we had to come from that branch. It's it's mindset, the paradigm driving the evidence to them. So.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. If you share my screen quickly, Brian, I've got a whole presentation refuting them on that. But, one of them, for example, they're going to say M and N came from L, as Matt was saying. They could not have lived at the same time because, they're separated by DNA differences. They'll look to, so for example, on this particular slide, you can get this from Dr. Jensen's paper on mitochondrial DNA clocks. Notice how when you bring in fossil sequences, well, there's even more differences. So the branches, which represent DNA differences or mutations, they go really long. So the evolutionists will say, okay, well, firstly, the African branches are a lot longer, and they assume that the longer the branch, the more time has passed. But that's where they're mistaken, as we went over many reasons why you can have longer branches in a short amount of time, especially with Neanderthals. I mean, we showed that paper, I think it was from 2022, hypermutation in real-time families, and they were passing on 2 to 7 times the amount of mutations. Neanderthals would have lived in less than ideal conditions right after the flood. They most likely would have lived near on radiation rocks. As we know, the flood is producing a lot of heat, energy, radiation. There'd be leftover remnants of that in the immediate post-flood world. And you'd have some people groups like Neanderthals that are living in those harsher conditions. And as a result, it's affecting their genetics, affecting the mutation rate, destroying DNA repair enzymes, passing on more mutations. And I just recently published an article here that I'd recommend people check out on my Patreon. The LMN haplogroup bombshell gets even stronger, Brian. And I address the newer objections that have come in, because going back a couple of years ago when I gave this talk with you, and I also published an article on it, more objections have come in. But I think the biggest one is when they say, as Matt knows, well, LM and N can't be the daughters-in-law of Noah because they could not have lived at the same time. They're separated by DNA differences. Yeah, they're only separated by short lines. Remember, I showed this in the presentation. Look at L, M, and N. These are the lines separating those nodes. There's only a few DNA differences. There's less than 10 separating them. Once you get to other haplogroups like the R haplogroup, notice how the line is longer. So more DNA differences, probably was not living at the same time as these three, so not contemporaries. This could be a post-flood Babel diversification event, would be the point. But here, L, M, and N could represent Noah's 3 daughters-in-law because they're separated by shorter lines, which means few DNA differences. They could have come from different families, different histories. And I have that here. Notice this. Since the lifespans in Genesis 5 are very long, hundreds of years, right? So you could literally be living at the same time as your great, 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 great grandparents. Isn't that incredible? You could be talking and sharing stories and going for Christmas dinner. Of course, there wasn't Christmas dinner in the pre-flood world, but getting together for, holiday weekends and chatting it up with your great, 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 great grandparents. That's incredible. So that means L, M, and N were or could have been contemporaries. Genesis describes long lifespans in the pre-flood world. Therefore, we should expect what? A lot of overlap. So Noah's 3 daughters-in-law could have come each from different families, had different mutational episodes, so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, Brian, their main objections: Neanderthal branches, the African branches, and then this argument that says M and N had to come from L. It's totally based on evolutionary assumptions, and we've addressed those.
Right. Can you all explain the mutation rates? I know y'all talk about how this was not fitting the evolutionary prediction on the mutation rates. What exactly did they predict on the mutation rates? What would we predict on the mutation rates? And what does the mutation rates actually show there?
Did you want to take that, Matt?
Sure. Okay. I guess I don't need a screen share again. They predicted, when they found the amount of total mutations, they said, okay, we already know the answer. We have the answer. So therefore, if we can go backwards in time, we must assume that these few differences arose over that 7 million year time frame. So they said, okay, now we just have to do a mathematical calculation. So we have 21 fixed substitutions in the mitochondria. If we go backwards 7 million years, let's do the math. How long does it take for 21 fixed differences over that amount of time? They said probably around 600 generations. So every 600 generations, a new substitution would pop up somewhere in the population and then start to spread till it reaches fixation, right? And so that was their concept. That's what they said must be true. If young Earth creation was true, then we only have about 6,000 to 7,000 years or so before the mutation rate, a substitution would arise and then drip to fixation pretty rapidly, because we have a population growth, then a drip, and then population growth, and then the Tower of Babel split, and then the world fills up rapidly, right? And based on population genetics and what we know about population growth rates, even tribal hunter-gatherers have a high rate of population growth. And evolution needs a population growth rate of net zero. That means the population growth doesn't go anywhere. It remains stable. Well, now you're in real trouble, because you have a lot of inbreeding and you have lots of fixation happening and a fast mutation rate. So they can't have their cake and eat it too. They're in huge, huge trouble with fast mutation rates. And that's the key. And that's also why they can't explain the data. It's just devastating for them.
Hey, Matt, I know that you've mentioned that the LPI also uses the same data, right?
Yes, they use the fast mutation rates of Parsons to this day.
What do evolutionists respond to that? I know that sometimes they say, oh, well, the guy that founded the evolution was founded LPI was an evolutionist or something like that, don't they?
They just complain about Parsons himself. Some of them try to still say, well, who cares, because it's just a single generation, and you only need a single generation mutation rate to catch a killer, because you're trying to just find a couple generations. For example, if I go and I kill somebody and they come and they test the DNA and they go, wow, it looks like his dad killed him, they'll have to look in my blood to determine if there's an extra mutation that I have that my dad does not. So then I'm guilty, right? So that's why the mutation rate works so good, because mutations build up every generation, aka diversity increasing, and it's increasing so much and so fast. Imagine if it was true with the evolutionary model and it was super slow, one substitution every 600 generations. You're not going to be able to ever find who's guilty. There'd be murderers everywhere, because you would never see any differences in the next generation. But the rate is so quick, you can look even at the slowest rate in the mtDNA and you can still catch them. That's how fast the rate is. So yeah, the FBI definitely used these rates. It's used in the real world. No evolutionary rate is used in the real world. They don't make predictions. They run from predictions.
Notice how the science that confirms our model, that's consistent with what we're saying, can be used in real world scenarios like that. I mean, if it's good enough for the FBI, it's good enough for us. Not the evolutionists, though, apparently.
Yeah, just because it confirms us. They hate it just because it confirms young Earth creation. They wouldn't hate it at all if it confirmed anything else.
And Brian, to strengthen that even more, this is why when you look at this slide that I have on the screen, fixation dynamics from the flood to Babel, this is our model in terms of how we apply it across the entire history of mankind, going back to the flood. So again, evolutionists don't understand that when they say things like, oh, you're ignoring the fixation rate, you're ignoring the long-term substitution rate in favor of the observed pedigree rate or empirical rate, they're proving that they don't understand the topic. They don't understand basic population genetics, because again, and I've got quote after quote, okay, and I've got it in my articles on the topic where they admit that the neutral mutation rate, or nearly neutral, because remember, evolutionists, they assume that the majority of the genome is junk. So they actually think that there's a lot of strictly neutral mutations. Fatuma would have believed the same thing, I'm assuming. And so when they say neutral, We actually know that means nearly neutral, because the majority of mutations are slightly deleterious. The majority of the genome is functional. So very few mutations would actually be strictly neutral. There's very few strictly neutral positions in the genome. So any mutations, no matter how low impact it is going to be nearly neutral. So that's why it's more accurate, even though the evolutionists deny this fact, that the nearly neutral mutation rate approximates the fixation rate. And they'll say, oh, but today there's almost no fixation, right? If you get a mutation in a random person family, let's say in Australia, well, Matt, what are the chances of that mutation? Because fixation means get stuck in place. How long is it going to take for that mutation to drift to fixation, where all people have that mutation at that position? It's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen. Yeah.
You got eight. Go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
I was going to say that explains why they're in so much trouble with these mutation rates, because how in their model can they claim a most recent common ancestor 6,000 years ago? The whole world is full, isolated islands. Yeah. Australia hasn't even been like really discovered, where there's aboriginals on the island for 60,000 years isolated, but yet they're testing the mutation rate in them, and they're the same as us. What? It's impossible. They can't. There's no way they have a bottleneck that puts the same time frame with us. So that's why they have to.
Well, it's a great point, because that's why they can't use the argument, oh, well, that wasn't the only woman, or that wasn't the first woman. And then you challenge them brilliantly. Okay, show me where there was this massive bottleneck where you have the earth restarted with, let's say, one woman out of a population, but then it just turns out that woman's mitochondrial chromosome gets passed on to everybody, and she's in a population. When and where did that happen 6,000 years ago in their model, right, Matt?
Right, exactly. They can run their math themselves. They can run a simulation with AI and just say, tell me what the probability value is of one female 6,500 years ago populating the entire Earth that we have today. It says 0.0000001. Basically 0% chance. It says statistically impossible, basically. So it's never going to happen. And that's from their own model. So that's why they say in these studies, how do we explain it? We can't. They can't. That's why they thought this mutation rate must be wrong. And they kept saying, we'll figure it out one day. Well, when's one day going to come? They've confirmed it every year for decades.
Right.
Just last year.
And that's why in the bigger picture, and let me make this point, Brian, let's throw it to you and move to the next point I want to talk about. But I want to make this clear to the audience and the critics. When they say, oh, you're ignoring the fixation rate, they don't understand that fixation is zero now. Like we just said, that mutation in Australia or China, it's not going to spread to fixation. That's because today we got 8 billion people spread out to all parts of the globe. In the evolutionary model, they don't even know their own model. Most of their history is spent in Africa in smaller populations, not spread out, in isolation. So yeah, they had faster rates of fixation. That's why someone like Fatuma can say that the neutral mutation rate approximates the fixation rate. We as creationists, notice how it fits our model beautifully. We got a fast mutation rate, somewhere between 0.05, 0.1, let's say, every generation, okay? Then you've got that roughly approximating the fixation rate, because after the flood, you have fast fixation from flood to Babel. And then they're going to say, oh, well, the population would have been too rapidly expanding. Okay. For one, we don't exactly know how fast it was accumulating. It's an assertion to say, well, the population was growing far too fast after the flood to Babel to slow down fixation. I mean, the Bible does indicate that the population is rapidly growing, but how rapidly, right, is the question. But the point is, they're still congregating. They still haven't spread out. They're still in smaller populations at Babel before they spread out to all parts of the globe. So you got fast fixation for that at least 100 years. Then phase 2 is the dispersal event. And then people spread out to all parts of the globe. The population grows to what we have today. So we have low fixation today. But that rapid rate of fixation from flood to Babel keeps that fast mutation rate equaling or approximating the fixation rate. So when Jensen says things like, well, he treats the mutation rate as a fixation rate or substitution rate, Matt, there is logic to that, because your fast mutation rate is also going to mean a fast fixation rate.
Exactly. And that's what Jensen did. And he did them a favor, because when he ran his study, he said, I'm not even going to count heteroplasmic mutations. I'm going to just count fixed and do evolution a favor, because the second I add heteroplasmy, it's going to be 4 times faster. So when people go, well, he's probably counting heteroplasmic and somatic mutations on accident, he goes, maybe, but guess what? I'm going to do you a favor and not do that. I'm going to try my hardest to not count those. And it still worked out.
Still worked out. You got to love when you give them the benefit of the doubt, just give it to them, and it still ends up working in our favor.
Still works. They're in so much trouble. That's what I mean. They can't handle this.
Hey Matt, you mentioned that there were several people that actually they just couldn't believe that the mutation rates were like that, and then they just kept on trying to do more studies, thinking that they're going to refute it, and then it comes back the same. Is that right?
Yeah. Holland was one of them, but he was smart enough to join the team and said, I want to see this for myself. And get this is going to blow your mind. In 1998, Parsons, when he brought him on the team, they ran the numbers. They checked it. Get this, hypervariable region 1 and 2, 1,000 times each. That's how much they scanned it. They didn't scan it like 2 or 3 times to make sure. They ran it through the system 1,000 times, each one, just to make sure. You talk about really double checking your work. That's crazy. And it literally confirmed what he'd had the year before. And he was no longer a critic. He said, answers my problem. That's why, because that's when Donnie and I reached out to Parsons ourselves, and he got back to us angry. He said, no, don't waste my time with this. I've already dealt with this for a decade, and no one's going to refute my work. It's not going to change. Decade after decade is going to pass, and no one's going to refute my work. And now I know why he was so confident, because you're looking at the D loop. You're looking at a region where selection cannot affect it. And his scientists, he had 10 of them in the world that were the best. They're still working to this very day. We're like, this mutation rate is legit. This is the way to go right here. We're seeing a legitimate actual clock, and this is the best clock there is. That's why so many studies use the D loop. Why do you think they focus on this region? Because they realize if I look at the entire empty DNA, or I just look at the coding region, natural selection is working there, and we're not going to get a very accurate clock. There's going to be too much guesswork. So let's focus on the area that matters the most. And when we do, what do we find? Lots of fixed substitutions in those areas, around 14. And then when we look at the control region, what do we find? Not very many, only around 7. Well, that's exactly what we would expect if the mutation rate's 8 times slower and you have about 6,000 to 7,000 years. That's exactly how many would arise giving selection to that region. So it actually works in favor of us still. So the region that is affected by selection is 8 times slower than the regions that we look at, and it has about 6, 7 mutations that are substitutions that are fixed. It's exactly lines up with what we see. I mean,
so Matt, are you saying that they're ignoring the areas in the mitochondrial chromosome that are accumulating mutations neutrally that selection can't really do anything about, which keeps that rate high, and focusing too much on the region that is that selection can act upon? Removing those, but what about the mutations that are not filtered out?
Right. So what they're doing then is they're looking at the studies to give the slowest rate possible, and then they're extrapolating that over to the entire mitochondria, or they're and saying, oh, well, like, you shouldn't look at those D-loop studies because they're too fast. What do you mean they're too fast? The geneticists themselves say this is the best clock. This is the best region to look at. You want to look at the bad region because if you can slow it down as much as possible, it can almost get to some evolutionary clock rate. That's how desperate they are. So
they play the card as if we're denying purifying selection is real.
Yeah. They go, you guys are looking at these mutation rates and ignoring that over time selection might be affecting it. It's like, no, you're on the page 1. We're talking about apples. You're talking about oranges. We're looking at the region where selection has no effect. Okay. None. That's why you can't slow the rates down. That's why the experts are saying selection has no argument here. It plays no place in here. So it's true. If you do look at the coding region, selection does take effect there. And so you have to go, okay, deeper pedigrees do matter, because you have to say, well, how strong is selection? How many are erased after 5 generations? How many are erased after 10? Then we can get an actual rate. And we've done that. And that's how we know it's slower by 8 times. That's okay. That region we've accounted for. So it lines up still with the timeline because there's only 7 fixed substitutions there.
Right.
It
And
works perfect.
And to clarify for the audience, because those coding regions, those genes are critical or vital for cellular energy production. So you get a mutation there, well, there's not going to be reproduction. The person who gets a mutation there, or the embryo that gets a mutation there, is not passing on their genes, because that person, they're not going to be surviving. But what we're focused on is the mutations that aren't that big. And that's why in my slide, I'm not going to screen share, but I'll just kind of reiterate it. My slide titled Purifying Selection to the Rescue, where I compare the non-synonymous versus synonymous proportions, because that's what people like Dan and Zach Hancock look to. They say, oh, look, there's a lot of selection because of the ratios that we see in non-synonymous versus synonymous mutations, the non-synonymous being protein altering changes that apparently selection can remove. But we're not disagreeing with that. We're pointing out the fact that all that simply does is shows what we've always agreed with, that harmful mutations that are above that threshold of being neutral or nearly neutral, they're filtered out. But that does not actually do anything to reduce the global throughput of fixation over generations, which is fast.
Exactly. And when we look at these control region, it's not the coding region, which means it's only doing like transcription, very trivial things. So there's no harmful mutations that's going to kill you there. So selection's not acting upon it. If selection's not acting upon it, background selection's not acting upon it. So how are you going to slow the rate down? Magic? You can't.
Yeah.
You can't do it.
Hey,
All right.
Donnie, you talked about Y chromosome in your earlier discussion. Um, you mentioned that recent paper that came out not too long ago. And speaking of rescue devices, in the paper and among evolutionists, they try to use sperm competition as a rescue device to explain those differences. How would you respond to that?
Well, that's a great question. I would respond in the same way that I have been in debates and in my presentation, where I'm not interested in potential mechanisms or maybe sperm competition. Unusual mating habits in chimpanzees means that there's going to be faster mutation rates, maybe faster rates of gene conversion, more deletions. Okay, just as I said in my presentation, naming mechanisms, naming sperm competition is not actually giving us a quantifiable model, a sophisticated mathematical model where you show us, firstly, let's see as best as they can a reconstructed Y chromosomal ancestral sequence, right? Because they believe humans and chimps, right? So you got humans and chimps. Chimps are supposedly our closest cousin. We go back to a common ancestor roughly 6 to 7 million years ago. What's a close approximation to what that Y chromosomal ancestral sequence would have looked like? Then we can actually test what they're saying and see where the gene deletions happened, where the changes occurred, which lineages. Because the problem for them is that they need to explain more than just gene loss. They need to explain the addition of genes. And if I could, just to make this answer slightly more thorough, Brother Brian, is I have an article here that I just put out that I highly recommend people check out. Why the bonobo chimp comparison doesn't help evolutionists. Okay. Firstly, to evolutionists that are watching, the challenge that still goes unanswered, we're looking for a rate-based population genetic model showing the required duplication / deletion. So yeah, they can invoke sperm competition all day. They've been invoking sperm competition since the Hughes et al. Paper in 2010. And they've always admitted that this is all untested. These are untestable or untested hypotheses. And that's why I have an entire list of questions here where I want them to model the changes that need to take place, simulate them, quantify them. To an evolutionist, screen capture this. Here's the questions I have for you. They list mechanisms all day, Brian. Well, what about sperm competition? But they never demonstrate that those mechanisms can actually produce the required changes in the required time. But then they'll say, as you know, oh, well, chimps and bonobos, you believe that they go back to a common ancestor and they're pretty different. Yeah, but it's not apples to apples, it's apples to oranges. And we can easily explain chimp to bonobo differences in 4,500 years since the flood. Okay, and I got a number of reasons here. Bonobo and chimp Y chromosomes maintain the same structural blueprint. Yeah, many sequence differences exist. Yes, some repeat structures vary in length. Yes, hotspots and drift can move quickly, but the architecture, the overall layout remains conserved. You can't say the same thing about humans and chimps in the Y chromosome. Okay, when you actually bring in humans and chimps, there's two massive of differences. Bonobos and chimps, there's no new gene families, no re-engineered palindromes, no remodeled fertility networks, no redesign of ampliconic domains. In my presentation, I was comprehensive because I went through what palindromes are, the differences in palindrome sequences, what ampliconic sequences are, the differences in ampliconic sequences. And so that's why the human chimp comparison still destroys evolution, but bring the chimp and bonobo in and they're easily explainable. And I want to just cover this and then I'll end with this answer. To account for the massive differences between human and chimp Y chromosomes, critics like Gutsy Gibbon, Dancer and Cardinal, these guys are going to have to what? They're going to have to explain coordinated gene loss and gene gain. Chimp to and bonobos back to a common ancestor on the ark. We don't have to explain any gene gain. They have to explain synchronized duplication events, wholesale reclustering of ampliconic regions. We don't have to do this with chimps and bonobos. That's why it's easier to model out. Does that make sense? Preservation of male fertility through all disruptive stages, simultaneous rewiring of multi-gene regulatory networks, chromatin domain reorganization with no loss of function. And so the bottom line, human to chimp Y chromosome differences are structural engineering differences. Chimp to bonobo differences, it's not equivalent, it's not parallel, it's not analogous. Okay, there's sequence drift and repeat length changes. And so we can easily account for those differences. And they seem to make that argument, Brian, implying that comparing chimp to bonobo Y chromosome differences and comparing humans and chimps is apples to oranges when it's not. It's completely different required changes. One is empirical, the other is evolutionary philosophy.
It's funny how they love the apples and oranges thing, just like with the mutation rate. Ignore that region. It's way too good under their blood. Or they don't even know what that region is. And they're like, they just conflate the two. They don't even know the difference. Like Dr. Dan, he doesn't even know the difference between the different regions. He's just extrapolating that like they're all the same. He goes, you guys are always bringing up that Parsons study. It's like, well, you complain that we bring up Parsons and you complain we bring up Jensen's. Can we talk about any study without complaint?
No, they're too biased. Well, let's just wait a couple million years for Dan to get his PhD and then maybe he'll know the difference.
Yeah.
So, Brian, does that make sense that it's not equivalent, brother? When they want to compare chimps to bonobos, the types of differences, the required changes are nothing compared to the required changes in types of differences between humans and chimps.
Okay, could y'all define exactly what it is when we talk about mitochondrial Eve and why this is a problem for evolution and why this supports biblical creationism as well?
Let me start by setting the foundation, then Matt will throw it to you. So what evolutionists mean by, because they'll typically in the middle of debates, like we've seen, right, Matt? They'll Google, oh, what you're saying about mitochondrial Eve is false because Google just told me that mitochondrial Eve goes back 200,000 years. And we're like, okay, that's an assertion. You just repeated what Google said. Why do they believe Eve goes back 200,000 years? What's the evidence? Okay, we get that's what the secular community says. And so basically to them, mitochondrial Eve is the most recent woman of whom all living humans are descended from through an unbroken maternal lineage, basically female line. And they'll say that that woman existed about 200,000 years ago in Africa, but she wasn't the first or only woman. She was part of a larger population. And so they'll say, well, mathematically, we would just expect that at some point we're going to come from one woman and one man, and they look to coalescence theory and all these different things. So, Matt, let's throw it to you now. Why doesn't that work? Why is the way they view mitochondrial Eve? Why is that a fairy tale? Why is it evolutionary philosophy?
Because as you mentioned earlier, it's a retrodiction. It's something that came after the fact. When they realized how low diversity was in all life, not just people, because the human population is large. So they thought, well, the larger the population get, the stronger selection gets. So that probably weeded out a lot. But then they started testing animals, no matter if they were a small population or a large one, it was a paradox. It even has a particular name, like Linwood paradox. And they said, wow, all life has low genetic diversity. How are we going to explain this? And there really hasn't been. It's still a massive paradox. It's called the population paradox, is one of them. They said, well, there must have been catastrophic bottlenecks for each little population. Well, that's convenient. There's no evidence of that. In hunter-gatherer populations, they tracked them for a few generations and realized, well, that's not true. They need a population bottleneck like every few generations for this to be true. Then they said, well, there must have been a global bottleneck. So what they do? They went looking for one. Guess what they didn't find? They didn't find any global bottleneck anywhere. So that's why Erica said in my debate with her years ago, well, maybe the mitochondria just goes through its own bottleneck on its own. Maybe there's an invisible genetic bottleneck that just happens in animal life every so often. And I said, at the same time, what are they talking to each other? Is my mitochondria talking to yours right now? How in the world would it know to reset itself? That's ridiculous. That is just the worst. That is the craziest rescue device I've ever heard, except for when Snake was right, said, well, maybe man did draw that dinosaur, but it wasn't because dinosaurs lived recently. Maybe man lived back then. I was like, oh my gosh, you were almost there, man. You were almost there. So it's a retrodiction. They saw the low genetic diversity and said, we have to reset it. Let's just say there was a global bottleneck. So they said there was a global bottleneck, but they hadn't researched it yet. So then they went looking for it later and didn't find one. That's the reality of everything. There is no global bottleneck 200,000 years ago. And they couldn't find one, especially one big enough to kill all life.
Well, here's what absolutely demolishes their out of Africa model. This is what demolishes their appeal to coalescence. Coalescence for mitochondrial DNA. What that means is we're tracing everyone's mitochondrial DNA backward in time until all of your different family lines of mitochondrial DNA meet at one woman. Okay. That's coalescence, making that happen, determining that by looking at alleles and tracing them back to a common origin. And so evolutionists will say mathematically that was a guarantee. No, it wasn't. Okay, think about this. In their history, you have two out of Africas. You have Erectus living on the globe. They say Homo erectus, upright man. He's the most successful human being, the most successful human that's ever lived, even more successful than us. Homo erectus thrived for 2 million years. I mean, that's crazy. Where's all their bones is the question I have. Anyway, so it's sad to explain because this was kind of confusing. This was a challenge. Homo sapiens leaves Africa, right, Brian? Who do they find? Oh, Neanderthals. Oh, you got Heidelbergensis, Denisovans. You got all these other people groups. You got Homo floresiensis, the hobbit, on the island of Flores. Homo naledi. You got all these other human types living at the same time. Kind of confusing for evolutionists. So what's interesting about the one mitochondrial DNA line, think about it. Erectus is said to leave Africa and then evolve independently into these other Homo species. But then Erectus also stays in Africa, eventually evolves into Homo sapiens. But what's happening during all this time? You're accumulating DNA differences and mutations and diversity in all of these different Homo species. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Heidelbergensis, Erectus. We know there's interbreeding. We know there's gene flow. We have genes from Neanderthals. We know that we were interbreeding with them. Okay. Also, a lot of these, the human beings in Africa, they're living in isolated tribes. So what you would actually expect, different tribes, different groups, different human species on the globe, inside of Africa, outside of Africa, in Asia and in Europe, Eurasia, they're accumulating all this different kind of DNA diversity in mitochondrial DNA, in autosomal nuclear DNA, and the Y chromosome. So why in the world, gentlemen, would we only find a single mitochondrial DNA line and a single Y chromosome line? We should find many. We should find many mitochondrial DNA lines, many Y chromosome lines, but yet we find a single mitochondrial DNA line and a single Y chromosome line. What I just explained in a nutshell, the evolutionary fairy tale, the evolutionary, interesting, would make a good fairy tale Netflix series, right? All these different Homo species competing with each other for domination and going to war and conquest. It sounds kind of like Lord of the Rings. But the point is, no, if evolution's true, Matt, should we actually expect a single mitochondrial lineage and a single Y chromosome lineage? Because everything I just described would tell us that no, we should actually find more diversity and more lines.
And it gets even worse, because what did they just find last month? A human Homo sapiens skull in China dated 1 million years. So not only did Homo erectus live with all them, we lived with them too.
Right. Yeah. Side by side.
We were like, yeah, high five to the erectus. And then we're all living together. It's really bad now, because guess what? Now they've just tacked on a lot more time to this bottleneck and mutation rate, because now the mutation rate doesn't just have to go back 200,000 years, right? Now we've got to go all back to 1 million. Uh-oh, it's getting worse.
So much overlap,
right,
which is what we'd expect. This is like Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth, where you've got the hobbits sharing the same world, right?
Elves.
Hobbits, the elves, the trolls, the dwarves, the world of men, you know, the orcs, just all so that's the evolutionary story. Now that we know there's all this overlap, you don't have this linear progressive series of ape-like creatures to man. You actually have all these different, according to them, Homo species. We'd say they're all one kind, one species, where you've got Heidelbergensis, Floresiensis, Naledi, Denisovans, Neanderthals, Homos, all living at the same time, sharing the globe together.
Right.
Overlap is what we'd expect in the Out of Babel model.
And it's too bad that they don't test Homo erectus, because they just, they're too old. So they just threw in their evolutionary philosophy into the science, because one day they're going to test them and they're going to realize, they didn't live for 2 million years, because their diversity is going to be low too one day. Somebody out there, hopefully a creationist, will be like, that's a great idea. I got the lab, like Dr. Jensen, right? Grab a Homo erectus and grab their mutation accumulation. Let's see how many they have fixed. If they live for 2 million years, guaranteed they don't have.
You know, interesting. Netflix just bought HBO Max.
Yes.
Or HBO or Warner Brothers, something like that.
So if you're if you're a DC Comics fan, we're hoping that they restore the Snyderverse, get some more.
There's some rumor of that.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
But right. But maybe they'll have evolution on there.
Yeah, right. It'd make a good series. You know, they could call it, Middle Earth, and we can see how all these different human species interacted with each other, and how did we actually get Neanderthal genes? Was this something a little more scary and evil, or was there cooperation with these groups? Like, what was really going on? So maybe they can put that into a cool Netflix series for us called Hominin Conquest or something.
Hey, I've got a question here. What are your thoughts on the mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic trees commonly shown in evolutionary literature? Are they inherently biased?
Yeah, well, the phylogenetic trees that I showed in my slideshow, one from Dr. Carter, one from Dr. Jensen, that's just an unbiased look at the data. You take all that mitochondrial DNA, have a tree building program, spit out the data in the form of a tree. And that's why sometimes unrooted trees are nice, because you can get a good idea of the data without making any assumptions. And you see the biblical time built in. But Matt can touch on this. But when you look at the evolutionary rooted phylogenetic trees, well, they're assuming an outgroup They're assuming that humans and chimps go back to a common ancestor 6 to 7 million years ago. They're making assumptions on the evolutionary molecular clock. They're assuming that we originated from Africa because Africans have more DNA diversity, and so they root the tree along that lineage. And so as a result, you get the nesting pattern, the phylogenetic pattern that they love so much. And so, yeah, there's a lot of assumptions being put into those phylogenetic trees where it's no longer really a natural reading of the DNA data.
All right. Matt, did you want to comment?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think what happens is there's always a mindset of somebody going into the data, and you're going to read it and interpret it how your worldview is. If you're only ever taught evolution like we were, you're only going to believe evolution. It's not until you learn contradictory evidence that you go, oh, maybe it's not a paradox anymore. Maybe there's a better answer. And the answers are better because think about it. The L, M, and M haplogroups, how many mutation differences did Donnie say there were? Not many, right? So are you telling me there was no genetic diversity from creation to the flood to account for such a small amount of diversity? Of course there was. So those wives were on the ark. They had that little bit of diversity. It's really that easy. It's so simple.
Right. What would you say is the biggest misunderstanding critics have about the young Earth interpretation of mitochondria Eve? What is the biggest straw man that you've heard, Donnie or Matt, that these critics make on the mitochondria Eve that's just like misrepresents what we think?
The Google
Great
search,
question.
200,000.
Right. We literally thought the exact same thing. They don't understand that we know what we're talking about. We've done that. We know that if you Google, when did mitochondrial Eve live? Yes, we get it. It's going to say 200,000 years, but why do they believe that? Why is it telling you 200,000 years? They also, well, here's the thing. Most evolutionists are actually not informed enough. You can watch our last couple debates on this issue anyways. And so that's basically the straw man right there. When you get more informed evolutionists, let's say Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal, well, then they're essentially straw manning us on purifying selection, as Matt pointed out, right? They're misunderstanding the nature or relationship between the mutation rate and the fixation rate. They're misunderstanding the biblical model in terms of the pre-flood world, that we have all these overlapping generations. People are living hundreds of years. So a kid can live with his great grandparents, which is going to have an effect on the root of a mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic tree. We're going to have to read those nodes differently with that understanding. And one other thing, and then Matt, if you had anything you wanted to add, people like men living to an old age and having kids at an old age, that means they're going to pass on more mutations because man is accumulating more mutations as time goes on in reproductive cells as well. And so then they can pass on a lot more mutations. Let's say Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they're having kids. They're probably passing on a ton of mutations to their sons, which is going to result in a really long branch that evolutionists are going to assume is a long time, but really it's only one generation. Rob Carter said, oh, Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, their sons, they would have all been genetic poison to the post-flood world because they would have been passing on so many more mutations than we do because they're living a lot longer.
Right. So we're essentially looking at three typical things. Them saying, the people, they lived 200,000 years ago. That's what Google says. They don't have any idea that it's actually an inference based on a calibration to a fossil split. That's it. That's where that number comes from. And then they also don't realize that they go, well, you don't realize that the most recent common ancestor isn't the first woman. She just so happens to perfectly land on the biblical timeline. Convenient for us, I guess. And then they also don't get that selection isn't going to save them because we're looking at the DNA compartments that are selection free. So purifying selection and background selection, that's even dumber, but that's none of them are going to save them. And none of them are even on the right page. They're literally arguing again. Step one, we're on like page 10. It's like, you guys aren't even with us on this conversation, it seems.
All right. Do y'all guys want to go ahead and jump into the Q&A and answer some questions?
Oh, God, I thought that was. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, let's do it.
Oh, that was just the discussion part.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it.
All right, this is from Lynn Mitzi. Do you hold to the fact that Adam and Eve were created fully grown and knowledgeable, as Adam named all animals so he couldn't have been unlearned, correct?
Oh yeah, makes sense to me. I mean, how could he tend to himself as an infant? He had to at least be created at least in a physical teenager body, right? Because
And he had a capable communication too.
right, exactly. Can't be instructed what to do when you can't understand anything or do anything. It would make the most logical sense that it says he created man from the ground. It didn't say that he created child from the ground. So I think it's kind of clear that there was an adult coming out of that ground. Yeah.
And he would have been not only front loaded with the DNA diversity that we that we talk about, but front loaded with knowledge, like you said, Brian, front loaded with information. He would have been incredibly smart. He had to name all the animals in a single day. Not every oh, this is a Chihuahua, oh, this is a Great Dane, oh, this is a leopard, a cheetah. No, probably one representative of a greater kind. And so created fully grown, mature, functionally mature, that is just like the universe. And that's what's interesting. Dr. Jason Lau made the point in one of his formal debates with Dr. Hugh Ross that if scientists were to come and analyze Adam right after he was created, they'd conclude two different things. Think about it. If they were to measure him, oh, look at his height, look at his weight, look at his hair. He's old. He's at least, 32, 33 years old. And then they do some blood tests, blood samples, complete blood count, check his cholesterol, things like that. And they're like, look at this guy. This guy is healthy to the point where it looks like he was just born. So they got a mix of evidence. But yet today in the universe, isn't that what we find? Evolutionists love to look to distant starlight and dating methods and meteorites that are dating at billions of years old. But then we point to C14 in diamonds, helium and zircon crystals, short period comets, decaying magnetic field. So it kind of seems like there's a mix, right? Just like with Adam. And what does that suggest? That suggests a universe that's functionally mature, created functionally mature. And that also suggests Adam was functionally mature.
Well, he was smart enough to know not to sit there and take an animal as his mate, so that was pretty good.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. We wouldn't be here today.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Don't think so.
Well, according to the evolutionists, the Australopithecines and chimpanzees, whoever their common ancestor. I mean, we're so close to them. How come Adam didn't say, look at, this is he was smart enough to know that nope, none of these are suitable.
Right. All right. So this is also from Lynn Mitzi. So there was no death before the fall, as God said, it is good, very good. I think it's more of a comment, maybe.
Amen.
Well, it's got a question mark. So there was no death before the fall. Yeah, there's no death all before the fall. No. What would y'all guys say?
Remember, I think it's Romans 8 says the whole creation groaneth in pain and mourn for that restoration. And because some old earthers will say, well, it's just no death for humans, right? And so, and it's interesting. Remember when we did that seminar, the 2 seminars with Sam Shamoon? He pointed to some of these other books like Wisdom and Maccabees and Sirach, I think, which show what the early Jews believed about this issue even before Christ. And in those books, they're even describing no death before the fall, and death is not part of God's creation. It's of the devil, and so on and so forth. Do you remember that, Matt? He was making some points showing that even before Christ, this is what the Jews were. Because whether you take those as canonical books, right, as non-Catholics, we wouldn't view the Apocrypha as canon. But whether you believe it's canon or not canon, these are legit writings from Jews back before Christ that were writing down their thoughts, what they believed, and they were clearly writing things down that's consistent with what we believe about no death before the fall as young earth creationists.
Right.
Right.
And that's what only changed with the advent of evolution. On Wikipedia itself, it says that the Jews believed in young Earth creation up until the advent of the theory of evolution. Their calendar
Yeah.
shows that itself. I know that there's people out there like IP who say, "Oh no, no, they were young Earth creation's new. It's a Seventh Day Adventist invention." But that makes no sense, even based upon Jewish history. They always believed in a biblical young Earth creation.
Right. Um, this also from Lynn. I've heard arguments about the Sumerian kings list and their 10,000-year lives. Could the
Ah,
math be months instead, leaving their lives to be 833 years, not 10,000?
I got that one. Don't you worry.
We just did a
You want me?
show with Dr. John Hartnett on that one last night.
Oh man, the Sumerian kings list. The Sumerians themselves had a different mathematical system. It's based on what's called a sexagesmal system on a base 60. So what you do when you run the math, what they did is they got a 28,000 year time age, but you divide it by 60 and it brings it down to 480. So you get the 8 generations before the global flood hit, and you have a total time of 4,020 years based on breaking it down after their mathematical system. So the only reason it's so large is because they multiplied it times 60. So if a person was 480 years old, basically times 60, and there you go, you're at 28,000. So it wasn't like they were following lunar cycles or something. It was just that they had different math. So
Right. Donnie, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. Well, what Matt said was really good. What we pointed out in our programs yesterday is that the Bible, the account in Genesis is the true story. But then, and this also comes to mind, the 2-part series I did with Gavin Cox from Answers in Genesis UK, Adam and Eve in ancient Egypt, Noah and the flood in ancient Egypt, where you have perverted or distorted accounts in these ancient civilizations that were paganized that actually point to the true story in Genesis. And so one could say that the Sumerians basically inflated the story, but Genesis preserved the truth. That's why you find exaggerations and distortions in ancient Egypt and with the Sumerian king list, because they're basically preserving a corrupted version or memory of the real long pre-flood lifespans, where we know there's so much evidence. Matt talks about it all the time. The different antioxidants, superoxide dismutase. That's what it is, right, Matt? And
yeah.
these important enzymes and DNA repair, having more DNA repair enzymes in the pre-flood world, more better telomerase, so on and so forth, works nicely for us to understand. Yeah, man could have lived to 900, but could man live to 10,000? Well, no, of course not, because one might say, well, those are exaggerated ages from perverted basically from the true story in Genesis. Brian, does
Right.
that make sense, brother?
Yes, I want to add something to that as well. Like you said, there are clear distortions in that, but at the same time, there's probably kind of a kernel of historical truth, because one of the things that I found interesting is that the King's List would break off into a global flood, and before
Yeah.
that, they had phenomenal rains, right? Because so obviously they had to live for a pretty long time, and then all of a sudden it starts shortening a lot
That's a good point. Yeah.
following the flood. So could that possibly allude back to the situation of longevity before the flood? Then following the flood, their lives were much shorter. Um, that's obviously noticeable in the Bible.
Well, that's why you see
Exactly.
all these legends of the Golden Age and all these different ancient cultures. Well, what's with all these stories and legends of the Golden Age if there wasn't really a Golden Age?
And why would you put that into your religion? It makes you look stupid. You're like, I'm going to make up a religion. I know my great grandpa was 1,000 years old. Yeah, that's
Right.
really going to get people turned on to my
Yeah.
religion. That's
Yeah. If it was so unbelievable and false and scientifically impossible back then, why would they write the ages like that?
yeah,
Clearly, it wasn't that far fetched. It was something that was known and understood because it's true.
right. And when did
Right.
they stop becoming true? Because we can see the ages increasing over time. Even in in Egyptian time, they said like they were living to 143 at this time. And when did the ages become eventually fake? You can't do it. Just like the people. Like when does it become fake? Right when we hit Noah, like his kids were real, but Noah wasn't anymore. See what I mean? You just there's no line. That's why it's either history or it's just not at all.
Right. All right. Next question, also by Lynn. I guess she had like 3 or 4, 4, 5 questions in. For Matt, have they tested the Amish to see what they are different? She's talking about, I
Oh,
guess, the genetic.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome question. A best one yet. Oh man. Okay, yes, they have. And guess what? You're going to be shocked. Share the screen. Look at what they say right here. The lower mutation rate does not appear to have a genetic component, pointing to the possible role of environmental factors modifying how fast human genomes accrue new mutations. Exactly what we've been saying the entire time. It's not a people group that's doing it. It's where they are. It's what they're doing. Why is there a pygmy group of people that have some of the highest mutations on Earth? Could it be because of what they're doing and who they are and where they're living? Or is it just built into their genetics? No, of course not. They're different people groups mutating at different rates. It has nothing to do with, well, they're genetically superior. No, it's everything to do with the environment. That's why Neanderthal, living in a harsh environment, living in small packs of people like pygmies would be, isolated like tribes, like these Khoisan hunters. That's what's going on. And the mutation rate is variable. It's not consistently always true. So that's what's really cool is they're showing you right here, like, oh man, there's something going on with the environment that's altering the people's mutation rate. And it's a little bit slower. It's what is like 7%, 7 to 14%. So not like vastly, but enough for it to show up and for them to recognize it. So if it can go slower, guess what? It can also go faster in some people. So that just makes it even worse for them because guess what? The Amish people go ahead, take their little 7%. Or let's go with 14. Okay, we have a 6,000 year mtDNA ancestor for Eve. What would be doing if we slowed that down 14%? Let's find out right now. It's still going to land on the biblical timeline. It doesn't even matter. 6,000 minus 14%. We got, or actually, I should plus it. 6,000 because it'll increase time, right? So, oh look at that, 6,840 years. Whoop-de-doo. It's not going to help them, you know. So okay, so we have a people group that's mutating slowly. Obviously, the Amish haven't lived from off the ark. They're a newer population people group, but let's assume that they did. They got off the ark, and that was how slow they started mutating. Guess what? It still lands on the biblical timeline. That's not good for evolution. Where's the 100 to 200,000 years that I'm supposed to see on this calculator? Come on, it's not there. You're still landing on our timeline. So if that's the best they've got, that's not good.
Right. Donnie, do you want to add anything?
Nope. Matt gets an A+. I'm happy with that.
Oh, look at that new question. Question for Donnie and Matt. Is there currently testable predictions that we can come up with based on these young Earth mtDNA data? I mean, what more can we expect? Yeah, no, Nathaniel Jensen has did an open challenge to anybody. Remember in his debate with Fatima or whatever? Who was he debating? That PhD biologist?
Herman Mays.
Herman, no. The other one from BioLogos. Or no.
Oh, who? Are you talking about Nathaniel Jensen and Venema? Dennis
Yes,
Venema?
Venema.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
He actually challenged him outright. He said, go ahead and pick any animal you want. Make your prediction on what its mutation rate is going to be based on evolution. I'm going to make my prediction based on the young Earth creation timeline. We'll see who's right. I'll run our laboratory. We'll go as deep as a pedigree you want. Guess what? He said, actually, that's a really good prediction. And no one has taken him up on it. So what does that tell you about the confidence of evolution and their view of these pedigree mutation rates?
I mean, right there is basically one big confirmation. Right there is one big confirmed prediction, isn't it?
Yeah.
Showing how all of history lines up from Dr. Jensen, lines up with Y chromosome mutation rates and mitochondrial DNA mutation rates. I would predict that we're going to find more and more data that all these different processes like environment and radiation and errors in DNA repair enzymes lead to higher mutation accumulation, more evidence for example, ancient DNA, why it has more mutations is due to hypermutation. Rare variants will continue appearing too young, for the old time scale. Haplogroups will continue matching post-flood migrations. More connections that I haven't read Dr. Jeanson's in its entirety his newer book on the Americas, but those kinds of predictions, I believe over time, are just going to keep lining up more and more where we fit all of history beautifully into the biblical timeline.
Hey, evolutionists often sit there and try to claim that young Earth creationists never make predictions. Like you hear a lot of times you hear Erica saying this, other evolutionists have said this, and I've seen countless number of predictions that young Earth scientists have actually made on the basis of young Earth model, and yet they still argue that we don't ever make predictions. What is y'all's response on that on critics who think that we never make any scientific predictions and stuff. Obviously, it's false, but you know, I'm sure you guys have encountered evolutionists who think that.
Yeah, the first thing I say is great. You just proved to me you don't know anything about the model. That's great. Okay, so you're arguing against something you know nothing about. Bravo. Bravo. Good job. So that's mine. I say I love it. I love when they say that.
I like to put the ball in their court and ask them, can you name me a single young Earth creationist prediction? Because we know there's just so many. I mean, we could literally do a 2-hour show on creationist predictions. Dr. Andrew Snelling has made it. What's that?
How many have we come up with? Me
Yeah,
and you alone.
Yeah,
20?
right. Yeah. Endogenous retrovirus handbook, the young Earth creation model, dozens of predictions. And that's what we like to do in debates. Do you remember the Planet Peterson versus PhD Tony debate? They're pressing me. They're like, oh, name one, because I was pointing out that Dr. John Sanford has published just dozens of papers in the conventional literature, right? And then, oh, well, name one on genetic entropy. Okay, let's see if you did your homework. Name me just any single paper that John Sanford has published in the second. Oh, I don't know. I can't name. You see how they're not doing their homework? Yeah. That's why they can't refute our position, is because they barely even understand our position. If they can't name a single young Earth, and that's why I spend a lot of time digging into the evolutionary literature, listening to what paleoanthropologists and evolutionary geneticists have to say. I sometimes, when studying a topic, so for example, I've been taking a deep dive into hominins and paleoanthropology. Most of my time, 99% of my time studying this topic and coming up with a superior model has been spent reading their papers, watching their lectures, watching their interviews, watching their own side, because I want to understand their side better than they understand their side. That's the best way we can counter their position. But too many anti-creationists, they're just repeating talking points that they've heard from other anti-creationists, and they're not actually studying what we have to say on these issues.
No.
Right. Donnie, interesting what you said there on they're not understanding our positions or something like that. I remember you in a recent debate, you and Matt both was in a recent debate, and then the critic sat there and said, "Well, show me the peer review paper talking about John Sanford's genetic entropy paper," and I'm like, okay, you clearly don't have no idea what the issues are at that point, because
Right.
even if you were debating Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal, he would have already aware of the paper.
Right. He would have known the H1N1 paper, right? The one of those famous papers that have been published. But these guys, they didn't even know the basics. And I'm just like, why am I going to do my homework? Why am I going to do your homework for you? They got to put in the work.
Yeah. All right. Trying to think. I've got some questions here as well that I put in the chat. I'm trying to.
Yeah, you're right. Look at that comment. Ancient cultures used biblical names and figures to name their cities. What are the odds of that? Yeah, what what was Egypt called? Mizraim or Mizria? It's like one of Noah's grandchildren named after him. So pretty funny. You're
Yeah.
right. All yeah, they found all 16 cities of all 16 of Noah's grandsons. Or what are the odds of that?
It's all an echo of the true story, the true account of the history of the universe, the history of mankind, the history of civilization. We find echoes of Genesis everywhere we look.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if y'all already answered this. What is the most common citizen criticisms you've heard against these pedigree studies? The studies that
Uh,
you presented, Matt.
the people that don't know even what they are, they just say it's selections, just removing them, and maybe your pedigrees are too shallow. They don't know that selection can't affect it, and the pedigrees aren't shallow. So next, that's it. It's the same thing. There's nothing new. They've been saying it for years. It's just I ignore it because I'm waiting for them to bring it up in a debate to smash them. But apparently they're too dumb to even realize that that's even an argument. So they just don't even bring it up even in a debate.
Well, and here's a secret. We like that even the best they have to offer, like your Dr. Dodgeball, Dan Stern, Cardinals of the world, we love that they hand wave and dodge all our arguments and responses, because we really look forward to, when we're doing these debates on Modern Day Debate or my channel, Matt, as you know, we discuss behind the scenes, we're hoping that they bring up the Dan Stern, Cardinal, the Gutsick Gibbon arguments, because we know that they don't have responses to our responses. That's
Right.
why all they can do is just repeat now. So we're just hoping that these guys bring up those arguments so we can dismantle them in real time. And as a result, we're also dismantling people like Dan Stern, Cardinal, because those arguments originated from them, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the best they've got. Erica brought him in because she didn't know anything about genetics, and he's the best they've got. And he can't, there's no answer to these things.
If he can't answer this, which we know he can't, then what hope do the cheerleaders and those that debate us in the debate coliseum or over on Modern Day Debate? We got another one coming up in January. What hope do they have?
Nothing.
They got no hope. That's it.
All right, from the YC perspective, what is the strongest evidence that mitochondrial DNA diversity points to a recent origin of humanity?
Oh man. Again, the D loop region of these pedigree studies that have been coming out decade after decade. The D loop region and the hypervariable regions are just functionally neutral, and the mutation rate equals the fixation rate. So they, in themselves, are the best answer to determining the history of humanity. And then we tap that into all of the other things to see if it ties into genealogies, if it ties into genealogical rates, if it ties into population growth rates, does it tie into the population spread of SNVs? And if everything points to the same timeline, then we're pretty confident that those mutation rates are accurate, and they're the strongest evidence for the diversity.
Right. Donnie, did you have any comments on that before we move on?
Matt did a good job.
All right. Can you explain the difference between the measured mutation rate in mitochondrial DNA versus the evolutionary calibrated mutation rate that critics often use?
Matt?
Sure. The difference is one is so slow that we've never ever observed it in an actual study. So the rate that evolution needs doesn't exist. What we observe is too fast, even in the protein, even in the coding region. So if the coding region is the slowest they've got and it's too fast, what hope do they have when they get to the good regions? They don't. That's why they hate them and they ignore them. The critics.
And remember when they say, oh, in response as a form of a counter to the observed mutation rates, how they're fast, way too fast for evolution to be true. And so they refer to their evolutionary rate. Oh, but the long-term substitution rate or the fixation rate. Wait a minute, guys. The per generation rate equals or approximates the fixation rate. So that doesn't help them either. Them appealing, but because what they're really appealing to, as Matt nailed it perfectly, Matt Naylor nailed it perfectly, that their rate, quote unquote rate, it's invented. It doesn't exist. It's not real. It's just as real as Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
They're inventing
Pikachu.
these things. They're
Yeah.
calibrating it. That's it. It's made up. It's sad, really.
Right. All right. We're uh, wrapping it up now at this point. Do y'all have any maybe a conclusion or final thoughts to leave everyone with regarding this matter and and everything that we discussed today?
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you guys remember, Christmas is coming up. We got some books over here. I got The Quest for Noah. Little tiny thing, but they're super cheap. I go through it a lot in there about how these mutation rates line up with what we see in known history. And it's a physical book, so they'll make good little gifts, pretty cheap too. They're like, I have a black and white version if you really want the cheap version. And they're great because they show the history of humanity and how everything correlates. And when there's that much, parsimony between different branches of science all confirming the same thing, science deals in p-value, right? So statistical probability. What are the odds that everything converges on these rates? It's highly improbable that the other rate is true, the evolutionary one, when everything else contradicts it. So that's it. I want to remind everybody, you might not know the technical details, you might not know the exact base pairs of this. None of that really matters, because all you have to do is say the rates land on the biblical timeline and nothing can slow them down and change that. So you've got it in the bag. It's really that simple. And it's in all animal life too. Don't forget that. That's huge. I can see if it's just humans and animals looked really old, but they don't.
It all correlates. Humans, animals, the biological world. They all converge on one conclusion. Separate ancestry is true. You can trust the Bible. So here's a couple books I would recommend. Christmas Around the Corner, Special Creation. This is a large book like Matt's Young Earth Creation model book. There's a lot packed in here. Neanderthals, genetic evidence for Adam and Eve, genetic entropy, ERVs, so chromosome 2 fusion. So if you want one book that just covers all the best lines of evidence for evolution, demolishes them, this is it. This also makes a case for special creation. I really need to update. I've been working on for a while. I want to publish a newer book that's more updated, because a lot of what we presented tonight, Matt, as you know, has to do with a lot of the model building we've been doing. So I actually
Right.
want to get all that into a new book called The Case for Special Creation. I have the Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook, updated and expanded. This is the non-updated and expanded version. My updated one's upstairs, but you can find that one where all of the extra appendices that I've added has to do. We'll give you the details on years of model building on ERVs. All of the everything I've done in terms of the active research project there. So I'd recommend that. And if you like theology and eschatology, I'd recommend End Times Revealed. Goes into quite a bit there on what's to come. And so the last words I would say is believe the Bible. We started off the program almost 4 hours ago by setting the foundation. What does the Bible say? The Bible clearly says that God created two people, one man, one woman. Adam, the first man, Eve, the mother of all living. Jesus confirms that from the beginning of creation, he made them male and female. Matthew 23 refers to Abel. Abel did not have mythical parents. His parents were real historical figures, Adam and Eve, and the scientific data. Don't let the evolutionists intimidate you. What you've shown here in this super comprehensive seminar here tonight, we've showed you that the science confirms what the Bible says about human origins, and the best that the critics have to offer in terms of challenges, objections, criticisms, and rescue devices. We have answers. We have good answers. And as a matter of fact, the challenges that go unanswered are the challenges that we've presented to the other side. So the ball's in their court, guys. It's a great time to be a biblical creationist.
Awesome. Yes, it is. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Y'all wonderful. I love y'all stuff. Y'all keep doing the work y'all been doing on your channels and in your ministry and your books. And we very much appreciate it. We loved it very much. Thank you.
Brian, I appreciate it, brother. You keep up the good work as well. I was hoping at the end of the program, that piano you got behind you, that's nice. I was hoping you were going to go play a little something for us. Is that a piano you got
No,
to the
screen. No, screen.
Fine.
Screen, Donnie.
That's why it's
See?
all like, weird CG. There we go.
Screen.
He's
Yeah.
in a cave right now.
It's a nice house. A nice.
Yeah, I can be anywhere I want to now.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to see R and Raw pop up in the back of your screen.
You know,
after
I had
this
a critic that
dismantling of
also told me that they like. I had a critic that also told me they liked that piano, and he said, "Unless it's an illusion." I said, "Well, that's a green screen effect."
Yeah. A good one.
Oh,
Love
like
it.
my piano. Oh, no, I got a green screen behind me. Oh, all right. Again, thank y'all. I appreciate it. I think y'all have to go, and I have to go too. So this has been great. Over 3 hours long. I haven't done a video this long in a while. All right.
Hey, the
Appreciate
second we
it, and
stand
God
up,
bless.
we're going to be like, we're
Yeah.
going to be crippled.
Right.
Good
God bless
stuff,
y'all.
brother. God bless you as well. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Take it.